Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. My name's Stephanie, and I've lived in my house in New South Wales, Australia, for 18 years. Over those years, I've experienced so many ghostly encounters and strange events. One of the most vivid and chilling experiences I've ever had happened when I was around 8 to 10 years old. Our house is a Federation-style home with a large staircase that leads from my bedroom down to the front door. The stairs have a sharp turn to the left, so you can't see the door from the top of the stairs. Here's what happened. I was asleep in my bunk bed, sharing a room with my sister. I slept on the top bunk. That night, like many nights before, I woke up because of a strange poking sensation in my back. It felt like someone gently pressing a finger into me, something I had felt throughout my childhood. My mom used to joke that it was friendly gnomes trying to tickle me, so I never felt afraid of it. After waking up, I decided to get a drink of water. I climbed down from the bed and walked to my doorway. The house was completely dark, but as a kid, I didn't think much of it and went to the stairs anyway. The porch light my dad left on shone dimly through the glass panels of the front door, giving the area just enough light to see. As I walked down the stairs and reached the turn, I saw her. There was a woman standing on the second to last step, facing me. She was looking right up at me. I couldn't see her face clearly. It wasn't like a typical ghostly face you'd imagine. Instead, her entire figure was an outline. And where her features should have been, there was this strange, fuzzy, black and white static, like the old TVs from the 90s when they lost their signal. It was silent though, no sound accompanied her. What's odd is that I wasn't afraid. The memory feels hazy now, but I remember standing there staring at her and rubbing my eyes, thinking I must be dreaming or seeing things. Eventually, I decided to turn around and go back upstairs. As I walked, I felt a strange tingle spread from my chest and up my spine, almost like a warning. I knew she was following me. Even though I felt her presence, I didn't panic or run. I walked slowly and pretended not to notice her, thinking that if I stayed calm, she wouldn't do anything. Once I got to my room, I climbed into bed, faced the wall, and pulled the covers up to my chin, but I knew she was still there. I felt a quick, cold breath on my neck before everything went still. That was the last time I saw the lady on the stairs, but she's never left my mind. I still have nightmares about her, and my family knows not to bring her up around me. When I think back, a couple of details stand out. First, even though I couldn't see her face, I felt like she was smiling at me. I can't explain why. I just knew it in my heart. Second, her appearance was distinct. She had a 1950s-style bob haircut and wore a dress that puffed out from her waist to the floor, like something from decades ago. She wasn't thin, but she wasn't very large either, just an average, weighty build. I don't know who she was or why she appeared to me, but this experience will always stay with me. I've had many paranormal experiences throughout my life, starting when I was very young. I remember feeling the presence of spirits in my bedroom and even seeing a ghost at the foot of my bed when I was 11. Back then, I was never scared. I always believed they were friendly. But now, things have changed. It feels like a dark entity has attached itself to me and my mother. When I was a teenager, I experienced astral projection for the first time. I didn't know what was happening. I heard loud popping sounds in my ears and felt a tingling sensation all over my body. I could see my spiritual body starting to separate from my physical body, and I panicked. I fought hard to wake up, but it wasn't easy. Every time I tried to open my eyes, only my spiritual eyes would open. I tried yelling for help, but no sound came out, even though my mouth was open. I could see my spiritual arm moving in and out of my physical arm as I struggled to move. It was terrifying. Later, I learned what astral projection was and found out my mother had experienced it many times. Now I'm 22, and I recently moved back into my family home after living with my partner. One night, while we were in bed, my partner had his first astral projection experience, and it left him shaken. In the 6 years we've been together, I've never seen him so scared. He told me he encountered a dark shadow figure that tried to possess him. The figure controlled his spiritual body, throwing him around the room, and he had to fight to return to his physical body. That night, it happened several more times. I could tell when it was happening because his breathing became loud and heavy, and his body started shaking. I turned on the lamp and tried to wake him by talking to him and shaking him, but he wouldn't respond. Normally, he wakes up easily. Eventually, he opened his eyes and told me not to turn the lamp on if it happened again. He said the spirit noticed the light and looked around to see who had turned it on. The figure hadn't realized anyone else was in the room until then. Since that night, I believe the spirit has attached itself to me. One night, while staying in the family home, I saw the dark shadow figure hovering directly above me. It was only for a moment, but I clearly saw its face. Startled, I screamed and woke my mom. After that, I didn't see or feel it in my bedroom again, but my mother began experiencing its presence. She told me that sometimes she feels the figure pressed against her back while she's lying on her side in bed. She says it feels like it's trying to possess her because she gets the same sensations she does before astral projection, though something about it feels different. Each time it happens, she tells it firmly, "Go away, I am stronger than you." But it keeps coming back, visiting her every few nights. Early this morning, while sleeping beside my partner, I started hearing someone talking to me. At first, I thought it was my partner, so I woke him up several times to ask what he'd said. Each time, he told me he hadn't said anything. I assumed I was dreaming, but then I heard the voice clearly. It was a man's voice, low and scratchy, and it sounded distorted, almost like it was coming through a fan. He kept repeating, "Sleep, sleep, sleepy," in a slow, eerie tone, almost like a lullaby. It was the creepiest thing I've ever heard. I was on the edge of astral projection, but not fully there, and it felt like the spirit knew. After hearing my mom say she thinks it wants to possess her, I began to wonder if it was trying to lull me into a spiritual state to do the same. Later in the day, I told myself it must have been a dream, but when I told my mom about the voice, she was shocked. She said the spirit had spoken to her too, but hadn't told me because she didn't want to sound crazy. When I tried to describe how it sounded, she finished my sentence. Her description matched what I heard exactly. I have no doubt now that there's a ghost in our house, and it's not a friendly one. My family lives in a house that was built in 1902. It used to be a school, and we believe there might have been a graveyard on the land where our house now stands. Our town has several places known to be haunted, but our home has its fair share of strange happenings. It all started the very first night my family moved into the house, long before I was born. Since then, many odd and unexplainable things have happened. Here are some of those experiences. On that first night, my mom and my brother were sleeping in the same bed. My brother was only 3 years old at the time. My dad wasn't home because he was working the night shift. As my mom and brother lay awake, they heard heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. My brother's room was at the end of a small hall that led to a door opening into a bathroom. The footsteps stopped right outside that door, and we haven't heard them since. A year later, I was born. My first experience happened when I was still a baby. One night, I was crying, and my mom came to check on me. But when she tried to enter the room, she was stopped by something strange. A black wall or barrier. She couldn't get through and was terrified. I don't know what happened after that, but I vividly remember having a dream about it when I was about 8 or 9 years old. At the time, I thought it was just a weird dream. Later, my mom shared that same story with a friend, and I realized it wasn't just my imagination. Does anyone have an idea why I would dream about something that happened when I was a baby? For several years, I didn't notice much else, either because I was too young to understand or because I simply didn't think about it. But one day, my mom had an eerie experience. She was putting things away in her room when she noticed a little girl standing next to her. At first, she thought it was me, but the girl was wearing a Victorian-style dress. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, the girl vanished. Another time, my mom was in the hallway near our spare room. She heard something shaking inside the room, and when she went to check, she saw my toy pram moving on its own. A heavy extension cord was draped over it, so it couldn't have been easily moved. She thought it was me playing, but when she looked closer, she realized I wasn't there. I believe it was the same Victorian girl. Not long after that, my mom saw something even stranger. She was folding laundry in her room when she caught sight of a boy running down the hallway. He was dressed in rags and didn't have a head. If our house really is on a gravesite, could he have been someone who met a tragic end? There's a graveyard up the street, and we know it used to extend to the land near, and possibly under, our house. Footsteps are common in our house. We've gotten used to hearing them, but other things have been more unsettling. When I was about 8 or 9, I heard a woman laughing in our living room. When I went in to check, the room was empty, and the TV wasn't on. At that same age, my mom often heard someone calling Mommy in the middle of the night. She would come into my room to ask if I had called her, but most of the time I hadn't. Things got even stranger when I was 10. At night, I would often hear objects falling in my room. One night, while lying in bed, I heard my fake potted plant fall to the floor. The pot broke, and the sound startled me. Another night, I saw a heavy high-bounce ball on my desk start bouncing by itself. It even lit up as it moved. It didn't roll off the desk. It started bouncing on it before falling to the floor. Another time, I heard 3 separate objects fall in my room, one after the other, followed by the sound of breathing. It was unmistakable, and it frightened me. Even during the day, strange things happened. Once I was outside when my mom called me inside, thinking something heavy had fallen and hurt me. But after searching the house, we couldn't find anything out of place. Sometimes, the experiences were physical. One night, my dad felt someone poke his armpit while he was in bed. The next morning, my mom woke up with a swollen, bruised hand. A few days later, the same thing happened to my dad. The scariest experience for me happened on New Year's morning, just after midnight. My mom heard me squealing in pain and found me sitting up in bed, crying. When I woke up the next morning, my eye was swollen, and I had a black eye. There was nothing in my room that I could have bumped into, and I don't sleepwalk. To this day, I have no explanation. I'm reaching out here because I'm scared and don't know what to do. Nothing truly bad has happened yet, but I can't shake this fear. For the last 3 years, I've been hearing a strange breathing sound. It's hard to describe. It reminds me of someone using a ventilator. I can't pinpoint exactly when it all began. I just remember one night, lying in bed, caught in that hazy state between being asleep and awake. Suddenly, I heard breathing. It startled me, but I told myself to ignore it. Eventually, I managed to fall asleep. This same thing happened every night for 3 weeks. At first, I tried to brush it off, but after a while, I got frustrated. I was determined to figure out where it was coming from. The room next to mine belonged to my cousin, and the walls were paper thin, so I assumed it must be her. One night, when I heard the breathing again, I went into her room. Sure enough, that's where it seemed to be coming from. Relieved to have an explanation, I didn't think much more about it and went back to bed. For a while, the sound stopped, but about a month later, it came back. That night, my cousin wasn't home. She was staying with her stepmother. I started to feel uneasy. I thought maybe it was my Nan. She had trouble breathing sometimes, so I went to check on her. When I heard her breathing, I figured it must be her and felt a little better. My grandfather wasn't an option since he often went fishing overnight, so I ruled him out. Then the sound stopped again, but 2 weeks later it returned, on a night when my Nan wasn't even in bed yet because she was up watching football. That's when the fear really set in. Night after night, I kept hearing the breathing, and I knew for sure by then it wasn't anyone in the house. I remembered something my Nan once said about my great-grandmother. She had lived in that house and had been on a ventilator before passing away in the back room. I wondered if maybe it was her. That thought scared me, but I tried to let it go and ignore the sound. One night, the breathing woke me up again. I decided to head to the bathroom, and that's when I noticed something chilling. The sound was coming from just outside my window. It was so close. I didn't know what to do. 6 months ago, I moved out of my nan's house and into my uncle's place. I thought maybe a change of scenery would help. His house is quieter, perfect for focusing on my YouTube channel. At first, everything was peaceful, and I thought I'd left the breathing behind. But 5 weeks after I moved in, it came back. The first time I heard it at my uncle's, I quickly shut the window, hoping that would block it out. I've kept the window closed ever since. But now, even with the window shut, the breathing has started coming from inside the room. I don't know how it's possible, but it's there. It's gotten so bad that I stay up until 3 a.m. just waiting for the sound to stop. I don't know what it is or why it's following me, but I can't live like this anymore. I just want it to go away. I've been trying to figure out if something I brought into the house might be causing it. Around the time this all started, I remember bringing in 3 porcelain dolls. I can't say for sure if they're connected, but it's the only thing that comes to mind. I've thought about moving the dolls out of the house, one at a time, to see if that changes anything. But the breathing is so unpredictable that I don't know how I'd even tell if it stopped. This story is about my boyfriend's brother, Peter, who passed away earlier this year on February 18th. Peter struggled with alcoholism, and his smoking didn't help either. Sadly, pneumonia took his life, and both of his lungs had collapsed by the end. Peter lived in a small shed in the backyard of my boyfriend Tyler's family home, which was right across the road from where I live with my mom. From my front yard, I could see Peter's shed clearly. Living in that shed wasn't good for his health, and the toll it took on his body was heartbreaking. Peter was in his late 30s, but he looked decades older, frail and weak, as if a small push could knock him over. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Though we all loved Peter, it was hard not to expect his passing. He had been battling his demons for years, and his health was declining rapidly. We had even discussed life insurance for him, but his time ran out before we could act. Despite his struggles, Peter was a kind soul and was very close to my mom. He came over to our house almost every day and even had a special fondness for her. Naturally, he was close to all of us. When Peter's condition worsened, Tyler and I went to visit him with his family. The doctor told us he didn't have much time left. We all went in to say our goodbyes. Seeing him like that, confused and barely aware of where he was heartbreaking. The last thing I said to him was, "We'll come back this afternoon with Mom, okay? She's going to visit you. We'll all be here. But in the meantime, you keep fighting, Peter. We love you." After leaving the hospital, Tyler and I were emotionally drained. By the time we got back home, we both needed to rest and took a nap. Around 3:30 p.m., I woke up to the sound of my mom crying on the phone. That's when I knew Peter had passed. Tyler's dad had called to tell her the news. Later that day, we decided to let Tyler's mom's side of the family know what had happened. We visited her brother and shared the heartbreaking news. That evening, Tyler's family gathered at my house to support his mom and during this difficult time. And then something happened that I'll never forget. While everyone walked Anne back to her house across the street, it was just me, Tyler's stepmom, and his father sitting outside. I stared at the full moon, thinking about Peter. As my gaze shifted toward his shed, I saw something. A glowing, green, transparent figure stood in my driveway, perfectly lined up with Peter's shed. It was bright and clear. I could see its head, shoulders, and torso. The figure didn't move, and then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished when I blinked. But here's the thing, I didn't feel scared. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace and happiness. It was as if Peter was letting me know he was okay. I just stared at the shed, stunned. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but that feeling of peace convinced me it was him. I told my mom and Tyler, and they believed it was Peter too. About a month later, I had another experience. In our living room, there's a door that leads to the hallway. We usually keep it closed so my mom can't hear the TV from her bedroom. One evening, the door was slightly open, and I could see into the hallway. I felt this sudden urge to look, and when I did, I saw the same glowing green figure rush past. Startled, I called out to my mom, "Did you just walk through the hallway?" She replied, "No, I'm in the kitchen." When I told her and Tyler what I'd seen, they both thought it was Peter again. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I'm 20 years old now, and I've lived in the Gold Coast, Australia, my whole life. The strange experiences I'm about to share all happened in a house we lived in at Mermaid Waters until we moved out in 2003, when I was 10 years old. Since leaving, nothing similar has happened to me, but I still think about it often and wonder what it all meant. We moved into the Mermaid Waters house in 1997, when I was about 3 years old. It was a typical 1970s style home, sunny and colorful. Nothing about it seemed creepy or haunted, but from the start, I always had trouble sleeping there. No matter how tired I was, I'd toss and turn for hours. I couldn't explain it, but something always felt off. As a child, I'd often see a woman appear in my room at night. She looked like she had just stepped out of a bath. At first, I thought it was my mom because the woman had a dark green towel wrapped around her head and wore a mint green dressing gown, just like my mom's. She even had red hair peeking out from under the towel, and my mom had red hair at the time. But there were differences that became impossible to ignore. This woman glowed with a bright light, and I couldn't see her feet. Her body faded away below her knees, as if she was floating. She never spoke to me and didn't respond when I asked, "Mom, is that you?" Instead, she wandered around the room with a blank expression, then left down the hallway, passing my sister's room and disappearing near my parents' doorway. When my mom changed her hair color and swapped her green dressing gown for a pink one, I realized the woman couldn't have been her. One night, I got a verbal response. I asked again, "Mom, is that you?" The woman sat on the edge of my bed, smiled at me, and said, "I'm not your mom." Her voice was deep and distorted, like it was coming through a bad speaker. Then she got up and left the room as she always did. For years, I didn't tell anyone about her. I was so young when it started that I thought it was normal. It wasn't until we were about to move out that my sister mentioned something that gave me chills. She said, "I used to imagine a woman walking past my door at night." She still believes it was just her imagination, but I think it was too similar to my experiences to be a coincidence. The woman wasn't the only figure I saw in that house. When I was 6 or 7, I saw a man in a white mask and white clothing walk past my bedroom window. This happened twice. Both times, I screamed and ran to tell my dad, but when he checked outside, no one was there. The strangest visitor appeared when I was 6. Late one night, I noticed a shadow figure on my bedroom wall. It was short, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, and extremely thin, thinner than any person I've ever seen. The shadow had horns or spikes on its head and held what looked like a stick or spear. It moved around my wall, dancing and jumping. I was terrified, but I couldn't look away. After what felt like forever, I worked up the courage to yell for my parents. My dad came into the room, and I told him what I was seeing. He couldn't see the shadow, even though it was still there on the wall. I begged to sleep with my parents, but my dad offered to let me sleep on the couch in the living room instead. As he carried me down the hallway, I saw the shadow figure following us. I tried to tell my dad, but he didn't believe me. Once I was on the couch, the shadow appeared on the wall again, still dancing and moving. I watched it until I finally fell asleep at sunrise. When I woke up, it was gone. After we moved to a new house when I was 9, I told my mom about everything I'd seen. She then shared something that surprised me. Whenever she had to sleep in my room, like when I was sick and she swapped places with my dad, she couldn't sleep. She always felt like someone was standing by the bed, watching her, even though she never saw anyone. Since leaving that house, I haven't experienced anything like it again. but I can't stop wondering about those figures. I live with my mother and grandmother in a 3-story heritage house in Sydney, Australia. As you might guess, it's a pretty old house. Before we moved in, the house had been recently renovated, and they added 2 extra rooms, one of which became mine. Even though the house looks nice, it has always given me an uneasy feeling, even during the daytime. As a kid, I mostly stuck to the main lounge room when playing and avoided going upstairs unless someone else was with me. I was so scared of the staircase that I'd hold my bladder until someone came upstairs with me to use the bathroom. I never had a reason for this fear, just a feeling. When I was about 14 or 15, I moved into the upstairs room across from the master bedroom, which was my mom's room at the time. Around the same period, my older cousin came to stay with us, so I got used to hearing footsteps on the stairs at all hours, since my room had the only computer in the house. At first, it didn't seem strange, but then I started hearing footsteps when I knew no one else was home. I tried to brush it off as noise from the neighbors, but things got weirder. The footsteps became more frequent at night. They always started in the middle of the stairs and grew louder as they reached the top, stopping at the landing. I thought it might be my cousin playing a prank, so whenever I heard the sound, I would tiptoe to the door, hoping to catch him in the act. But every time I opened the door, there was no one there. My family started to think I was being paranoid since I kept opening the door before they had a chance to knock. I started to think I was imagining things, so I tried ignoring the sounds. But then the footsteps stopped at my door instead of the landing. That's when I got really scared. I told my mom, but she said it was just my imagination. I begged her to keep her bedroom door open and leave the hall light on, and for a couple of weeks, everything was fine. Then I began waking up in total darkness. The hall light was off, and everything I had hung on my door, bags, towels, jewelry, clothes, was on the floor. At first, I tried not to think much of it. I'd just pick up the items and put them back, but it kept happening, night after night. I blamed my family, thinking they were messing with me, but they just laughed and called it a teenage tantrum. Still annoyed with my family, I went upstairs one day to sulk and listen to music. While lying on the floor with my headphones on, I had the oddest feeling that someone was walking back and forth behind me. Thinking it was my cousin, I yelled at him to leave me alone. Suddenly, I felt something heavy pounce on me from behind. I laughed, assuming it was my cousin coming to apologize, and turned around to push him off, but there was no one there. I was completely alone in the room. Taking off my headphones, I looked around, confused and uneasy. A few months later, during school holidays, I was up late on MSN. Remember MSN? When I heard a loud bang that shook the whole house and made my dog start barking. I turned everything off to listen, but didn't dare go downstairs because no one else was home. As I sat in silence, the footsteps returned. This time, they started at the bottom of the stairs and sounded rushed, as if someone was running up. Frozen in fear, I watched as my cat perched at the edge of my bed, staring at the door. But just as the footsteps reached the top, they stopped. Everything went silent, like nothing had happened. Trying to calm myself, I turned my music back on and continued chatting with friends. A few minutes later, my towels and bag fell off the door again. My cat jumped off the bed and bolted out of the room. I didn't wait around. I ran too. I spent the rest of the night in the lounge with all the lights on until my family came home. I begged someone to switch rooms with me, but no one believed me. They thought I was overreacting, so it wasn't hard to convince my cousin to swap rooms. The next day, my mom started moving my things out of the room. While clearing the space, she was standing near the wardrobe by the door when a stack of art supplies I'd stored on top suddenly fell on her. She checked if I had stacked them wrong or leaned something heavy against them, but everything seemed fine. The window was closed, so it wasn't the wind either. That's when she started to believe me. I was just relieved it wasn't all in my head, and even more relieved to be out of that room. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal and experience it daily. This story marks the moment when everything changed for me. Before this, I'd had small, seemingly insignificant encounters, but after this, I was never the same. I'm not religious, but I do believe in spirits, demons, evil, exorcisms, and more recently, angels, all in a non-religious way, if that makes sense. A while ago, I spent a long time on a remote island, living in a cabin-like house with 6 other people. I'm not going to share where or why, but it was incredibly isolated. My housemates often complained about strange things happening. Footsteps in the hallway, the shower turning on at night, but I didn't take it seriously at first. I thought they were exaggerating. We took lots of photos of the house, and in nearly every picture, there were orbs, sometimes with what looked like faces in them. The orbs were especially common in the bedrooms and the hallway. I have a strong sense for spirits, and I always felt uneasy about one corner of the bedroom I shared with a housemate. It felt like something or someone was there. One night, I saw a dark figure in that corner. I could feel its presence, and it felt evil. I hated being near that spot. Once, I took a picture of the corner from my bed, and sure enough, there was a large orb right in that exact spot. That confirmed what I had been feeling all along. I believe this spirit was the one causing most of the strange activity in the house, and it seemed to enjoy tormenting me. My housemates experienced a lot. They talked about hearing footsteps, doors opening and closing, drawers and cupboards banging, the linen closet creaking open and shut all night, the toilet flushing, and the shower turning on. Some even heard strange noises outside, like talking or screaming. It got so bad that people would speak in tongues or have what they described as seizures in their sleep. Although I felt uneasy, nothing had happened to me personally, until one night when everything changed. That night, I had a nightmare so disturbing that I still can't bring myself to talk about it. I woke up sweating, even though the room was freezing, and my body was shaking uncontrollably. I wasn't cold. I think I was in shock. My shaking made the bunk bed move, and I worried I might wake my roommate. I tried to calm down, telling myself it was just a dream, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw faces. This happens to me often, and it never gets easier. It was around 3 or 4 a.m., and just as I started to calm down, I heard noises coming from the kitchen and hallway. It sounded like everything my housemates had described before: footsteps, creaking doors, and banging cupboards. The linen closet door, which was right next to my bedroom door, kept creaking open and slamming shut. Then came the worst part. I was starting to drift off when I heard the sound of someone running on wet grass, right outside my window, just beside my head. It was not an animal. It was the distinct sound of a person running. I froze. I knew if I turned to look at the window, I would see something standing there, staring back at me. When I get these feelings, they're almost always right. I remembered that I had left the window slightly open earlier to air out the room. That realization made me feel even more vulnerable. I tried to relax, but then the running sound returned. This time, it was accompanied by a loud screeching noise, like someone scratching at the window. I panicked and pulled the covers over my head, forcing myself to fall asleep. After that night, I couldn't see the house the same way. Every time I showered, I'd feel overwhelming panic, imagining the creature from my nightmare waiting just beyond the curtain. In the bathroom, I'd stare at one corner of the room, convinced something was there. It happened about 5 to 6 years ago when I was around 9 years old. My friend Layla was turning 10, and she invited me, Imogen, and Sonia to her slumber party. The party lasted 2 nights and 3 days. At Layla's house, it was just her mom, her little sister Charlie, who was there the first night, and her baby sister. The first night, as we were getting ready for bed, we heard crying that sounded like it was coming from a little girl. We thought it was Charlie having a nightmare, so we went to check on her. But when we got to her room, she was sound asleep. There were no tears on her face, and she looked completely fine. In the morning, we asked Charlie if she had had a bad dream, but she said no. She also mentioned that she had heard crying during the night. That was the first moment something felt off. Later that day, the 4 of us went to the skate park around the corner. The skate park was in the middle of a big oval, and at the back of the oval, there was a small patch of trees, a little forest. We had been there many times before and liked to hang out and talk there after playing soccer at the nearby soccer club. Nothing strange had ever happened there, until that day. As we walked toward the trees, Sonia suddenly fell backward. She started screaming, and so did the rest of us. Once we calmed down, Sonia told us it felt like something had grabbed her and was trying to drag her away. We were already on edge, but we decided to keep going to the trees. We sat down to talk, but after just a few minutes, I looked around and saw something in the trees. It was black, like a shadow, and it was watching us. I started screaming, which scared the others, and they started screaming too. As we watched, the shadowy figure seemed to get closer. It was moving between the trees, almost like it was teleporting. That's when we all sprinted back to Layla's house as fast as we could. I'm not a fast runner, but I swear I ran faster than I ever have in my life. When we got to the door, we knocked frantically, and after what felt like forever, but was probably only about 30 seconds, Layla's mom opened the door. We tried to tell her what had happened, but of course she didn't believe us. That night, we stayed up watching movies on Layla's back porch. At one point, Layla said she felt something cold and icy touch her. It couldn't have been the wind because it was a hot night, around 40 degrees. She fell asleep during the last movie, and the rest of us went to bed around 12:30. I'm usually a heavy sleeper, but something woke me up around 4 in the morning. When I opened my eyes, I saw Sonia sitting up in her sleeping bag with the most terrified look I'd ever seen. She was staring at Layla, who was standing up, facing the backyard. We all knew Layla wasn't a sleepwalker, so this was really strange. I whispered her name, and she turned to look at me. For just a second, I swear her face was covered in blood, dripping from her mouth, and her eyes were glowing red. It was the scariest thing I've ever experienced. The next day, we told Layla what had happened, but she didn't remember any of it. She didn't believe us either. When I got home, I told my mom and dad what happened, but they didn't believe me either. To this day, I have no idea what caused it. I haven't had many major paranormal experiences, but there have been lots of small, strange events that have happened to me and my family over the years. They feel like more than just coincidences. I've always been afraid of the dark. My baby law book even mentioned that I wouldn't sleep in the hospital without a light and music. Maybe it became a habit or was due to an overactive imagination. But as I got older, the fear stayed. Whenever my mom tried to break the habit, I'd lie awake all night, feeling like something was staring at me or lurking in my room. I'd often hear breathing near my bed, sometimes even feel it. I'd also hear my name being called, only to find no one there. Years later, I found out my older brother felt the same way. He even switched rooms with my mom and eventually moved into the rumpus room. My mom didn't know about any of this until my brother mentioned it was happening again. He was struggling with other issues at the time, and I wasn't brave enough to check it out myself. For me, the experiences seemed to stop once I started sleeping with the TV on around age 8 or 9. One of the most memorable things happened when I was a kid staying at my dad's house in a beach town near Hobart. My bed was against the wall, with a tall dresser at the foot of the bed and built-in closets along the opposite wall. The room's window faced the neighbor's house, so there wasn't much light. One night, I saw a round light, like a torch beam, shining on the dresser. The door was closed, and I didn't have a torch. Scared, I hid under the covers until I fell asleep. I never saw it again, but when I brought a friend with me months later, she saw the same light. She thought it was me using a torch, but again, there wasn't one in the room. Things got stranger when I was 14, the week my grandfather, Pop, passed away. He spent most of his time in a small room off the garage, which we called the den. He even slept there to avoid disturbing my grandmother with his snoring. He passed away in that room, likely from heart failure. That week, while my mom and grandmother were cleaning out the den, a sturdy shelf fell off the wall without warning. The bird feeder in the front yard, which had been hanging on the same branch for years, also fell down. There was no damage to the chain. My grandmother's favorite mantel clock also kept getting moved forward. even though she always kept it against the wall. They were small things, but it was odd for so many sturdy items to fall or move in the same week. After Pop passed, my grandmother often felt him sit on her bed at night. She'd turn on the light and see an indent where someone had been sitting. Pop also had a habit of pulling the cat's tails when he was alive, and it seemed like he kept doing it after he passed. The cats would sometimes jump and look behind them like something had spooked them. My mom would joke that it was Pop still teasing them. Years later, when I was 19, I moved back home with my dog. Our house was 2 stories, with my grandmother living in a granny flat downstairs and the main house upstairs. The upstairs lounge was rarely used after my mom set up a second lounge in the dining area. She kept the sliding doors to the main lounge closed to save on heating. She told us that some nights, around 9 p.m., she'd see a head peek around the glass door, as if someone was checking in. She believed it was Pop. We don't know exactly what time he passed, but it felt like he was still visiting. My dog has also reacted to something in that lounge. A few times, he stood at the doorway, barking and growling at the same corner of the room. Once I walked him into the lounge to show him there was nothing there. He stopped barking, but refused to walk through a small area near the wall, as if something invisible was blocking him. Another time, while my mom was watching him, he tracked something on the ceiling with his eyes, growling deeply the whole time. She said it lasted for several minutes, and no amount of reassurance could calm him. One night while I was out, my mom heard a loud noise in the pantry. She found a large mixing bowl spinning dramatically on the floor, even though the other bowls were still neatly stacked. It took her a while to work up the courage to leave the couch and investigate. More recently, after my great-grandmother passed away, my mom inherited her favorite recliner chair. Mom keeps a blanket folded over the back of the chair, but most mornings she finds it tucked neatly into the sides, just the way my great-grandmother used to keep it. Sometimes the seat cushion looks pressed down, as if someone had been sitting there. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I'm sharing this story. This strange experience started a few years ago when I was in grade 9 or 10, around 14 or 15 years old. I live in Mareeba, Queensland, Australia, and back then, something odd began happening whenever I tried to sleep. A presence, someone or something, would appear in my room when the lights were out. It's hard to remember exactly how it all started because it's been a while, but I know it was a tall, dark figure. I never looked directly at it, but I could feel it there. For some reason, I just knew it was a he. He would show up in my room when I was trying to fall asleep. Sometimes I was fully awake and would switch on the light immediately. As soon as I did, he was gone, though I never actually saw him leave. Other times, I'd wake up from a deep sleep and feel him standing next to my bed. Even after turning on the light, I could still sense part of him lingering in the room. This happened on and off for a couple of years. Sometimes he'd appear for a few nights in a row and then disappear for months, anywhere from 2 to 6 months at a time. There were 2 times I can remember when it felt like he climbed into bed with me. I'd wake up to the feeling of the mattress dipping, as though someone was settling in next to me. I panicked, finding it hard to breathe, not because of him, but because of the fear of someone I didn't know being in my bed. Even though I was scared, I could move freely. I'd reach for my bedside lamp, and as soon as I turned on the light, he would vanish. He never tried to stop me from turning on the light. Every single time, the moment the room was lit, he was gone. The visits stopped completely in 2011 after my cousin passed away in a traffic accident. For years, I didn't feel his presence again, but recently in January 2014, he came back. It started again about a week ago, on January 20th. At first, I couldn't sleep and felt like something was in the room with me. This time, it wasn't him. I felt a dark, cloaked figure hovering above my bed, watching me. The feeling it gave off was different, darker, colder. I immediately turned on the light, and the figure disappeared. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this thing wasn't the same as him. Last night, January 29th, I felt his presence again. The dark cloaked figure had only appeared 2 or 3 times in total, But this time, he, the one I call him, was also there. As usual, I turned on the light to make him disappear, and somehow I managed to fall asleep with the light on. When I woke up later, the bed dipped on the side opposite me, like someone was climbing in. I realized my lamp was off, though I had left it on when I fell asleep. Still half asleep, I felt the weight of someone lying on top of me, as though a person was resting on me like you might on a partner. At first, I panicked, rolling over quickly to turn the light on. When I looked back, there was no one there. That's when I remembered that I hadn't turned off the lamp to begin with, and I started to piece things together. I realized it wasn't the dark cloaked figure from before. The presence lying next to me felt familiar. It was him, not the other thing. Even though I had been frightened at first, there was a strange sense of comfort in knowing it was him. I don't know who he is or why he keeps visiting me. I also don't know what the cloaked figure is or why it appeared. But I do know that if I sense him again, I'll probably keep turning on the light, thinking he's the other figure. I don't know how to stop it or what to do about it. Before I begin, I want to mention that I used to host paranormal investigations. I consider myself a logical person and not religious. I was born and raised in Australia, and I'm now 24 years old. My father served in the Air Force, so my family, my mom, 2 older sisters, and I moved often. After 20 years of service, my dad decided it was time to settle down and spend more time with us. So we moved from military housing in Victoria to Maryborough, Queensland. It was my 5th birthday when we arrived at my Nana and Granddad's house. We stayed there while my parents looked for a house to buy. From the moment we arrived, something about the place felt strange. None of us kids liked the house. It was large, over 70 years old, and had been built by my great-grandfather. My 2 sisters, S and Steve, and I shared a big room with enough space for 3 single beds. In that room, there was a cupboard, and all 3 of us would often see the shadow of a person moving back and forth on it. What made it even stranger was that we hear the sound of bells every time we saw the shadow. This was just the beginning of what turned out to be 4 years of strange and escalating events. There were other odd occurrences too. My sisters and I had recurring, identical dreams, with the only difference being that our positions were swapped in each dream. At night, we'd hear what sounded like a dog chewing on a bone under one of our beds, but never all at once. We'd call out for Granddad, who would check and say it was just ants spraying under the beds, but the sound never stopped. We also heard whispers in our ears and our names being called, even in broad daylight. The most frightening moments were the screams we occasionally heard. Sometimes, our feet would be tickled at night, which left me with the habit of always covering my ears and feet when I sleep, even now. Now for the most memorable experience. By the time my parents found a house and we were preparing to move, I was almost 9 years old. I loved reading and often stayed up late with a small lamp. One night, my oldest sister, S, was at a friend's house, and my other sister, C, was fast asleep. I was sitting cross-legged on my bed, reading, with my lower half tucked under a blanket. Suddenly, my lamp went out. At the same time, I heard the unmistakable sound of bone chewing coming from under my bed. The faint glow of moonlight filled the room, giving everything a dim, eerie light. I cleared my throat, and the chewing stopped. Then my blanket, which was draped over the edge of the bed, began to feel taut, as if someone, or something, was pulling on it. I froze, terrified, as a horrifying game of tug-of-war began. I held onto the blanket as tightly as I could, but eventually, the tension eased, and I thought it was over. But it wasn't. A low rumble filled the room, and then, from the darkness beneath the bed, a large, dark gray hand, much larger than any grown man's hand, slowly reached out and grabbed the blanket again. Before I could react, the blanket was yanked completely off the bed and pulled underneath. I panicked, jumped off the bed, and sprinted to the door. Bursting out of the room, I screamed for my mom and dad. They tried to calm me down, insisting it was just a nightmare. You know that old explanation. Reluctantly, they walked me back to the room. When we got there, my sister C was still sound asleep, but my blanket was nowhere to be seen. My dad crouched down and pulled it out from under the bed. I refused to sleep in that room again after that night. That's my story. It was around 2:30 a.m. in early April 2012 when my brother, a friend, and I decided to go for a night walk. The moon was nearly full, and the sky was bright with clouds passing in front of the moon now and then. There were also occasional light showers. We planned to walk to an old limestone quarry we had visited many times before. As we walked down the driveway and onto the road, I was talking to my brother, who I thought was walking in front of me. But when he replied, I realized he was actually to my side, along with our friend. Yet I still saw a shadowy figure ahead of us. Then it vanished. As we continued up the hill, the shadow reappeared, darting around us. Sometimes it was behind my brother or my friend, and other times it seemed to move behind me. It was moving fast, and we all noticed it. Halfway up the hill, we started talking about it and realized we all agreed there was a fourth figure walking with us. When we reached the top of the hill, we stopped, debating whether to turn back. The shadow figure was standing about 10 meters behind us on the road, blocking our way back down. After a few minutes, we decided it must want us to go to the quarry, as it seemed to be keeping us from going home. So we continued toward the quarry. The shadow darted around us, sometimes ahead of us and other times behind. It moved incredibly fast. What I saw was a black figure wearing a small top hat. Then something even stranger happened. The shadow started spinning around me, but I couldn't see it anymore. My brother and friend said it was circling me, and they weren't lying. They were just as freaked out as I was. This happened 10 to 15 times during our 50-minute walk. They also said the figure would sometimes get right in front of me, staring directly at my face. It happened so often that I moved to the middle of the group to stay close to them. At some point, they stopped telling me when it was happening because they saw how anxious I was getting. When we arrived at the quarry, everything went calm. The shadow figure seemed to disappear. But as we exited the quarry on the other side, the activity started again. The shadow began running toward us from down the road. We also heard footsteps in the bushes along the roadside, as if someone was walking next to us. The shadow continued darting between us, rushing ahead, then circling back, and once again staring directly at me. On our way home, the same things kept happening, darting movements, circling me and staring at me. When we finally got back, we stayed up the rest of the night, trying to make sense of what had happened. I still don't have an explanation for that night, and I'm too scared to go walking at night anymore. What really confuses me is how everything became calm while we were in the quarry, only to intensify once we left. It felt like the shadow didn't, or couldn't, follow us into the quarry in the same way. Maybe there was something we were supposed to do there. At times, it even felt like there might have been more than one shadow. It was the early hours of December 30, 2013. Around 2:30 to 4:00 a.m., I need to emphasize that what I'm about to share isn't a fabrication or a game. It's something real, something dark and unexplainable that my two friends, let's call them M and C, and I experienced together. For context, we had been smoking weed that night, but it wasn't enough to distort our perception of reality. I've been smoking for years, and this wasn't something my mind could simply conjure. The night was quiet and still as we made plans to set off some fireworks near a park close to C's house. His home is right across from a dense, sprawling forest that always felt eerie. The forest stretched endlessly beyond the residential area, and we'd ventured there many times before. Each visit brought strange and unsettling encounters, bizarre sounds, unexplainable carvings in trees, and even glowing red dots that seemed to follow us. But what happened that night went far beyond anything we'd ever experienced. We started our walk toward the park, fireworks in hand. As we got closer, about 100 meters from the forest entrance, I noticed C's expression shift. He suddenly looked uneasy. When I asked him what was wrong, he brushed it off, insisting he was just excited for the fireworks. But as we approached the entrance, both C and M went silent, an unusual tension settling over us. Still, we pressed on into the forest. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Almost immediately, the atmosphere changed. Bats swooped overhead, their numbers seemingly endless. It felt like they were deliberately targeting us, diving uncomfortably close. We paused to light a cigarette and took a break on a fallen log. C and I sat while M, normally the loud and cheerful one of the group, stood a few steps away, his back turned to us, staring into the trees. His silence was unsettling. When I asked if he was okay, he muttered something about needing to pee and brushed off my concern. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but looking back, it was the first real sign that something was very wrong. The forest felt heavier with every passing moment, as though something unseen was watching us, disapproving of our presence. Uneasy, we decided to head straight to the park and get out of the woods as fast as we could. The path ahead curved sharply, its blind turn obscuring anything beyond. C and I were walking ahead, with them a few paces behind, still eerily quiet. That's when we saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, a sudden, blinding light flashed. It lasted only a split second, but as it faded, I saw a figure, a face and an outline, only a meter in front of us. The image was so vivid, so startling, that the three of us froze, paralyzed by fear. None of us spoke. It felt like an eternity before I regained the ability to move. Instinct took over, and I bolted. C and M followed, running as fast as they could. As we sprinted toward the forest's edge, the bats returned, swarming and diving at us relentlessly. My heart pounded as I ran, and in the back of my mind, unbidden, the words of the Lord's Prayer played on repeat. It wasn't intentional. It was as though my subconscious had latched onto it as a lifeline. By the time we burst out of the forest and into the open air, we were gasping for breath, our faces pale with terror. The look on C's face, especially, is something I'll never forget. It was beyond fear, something deeper, more primal. We decided to walk along a nearby path, far from the forest, to find a safe spot to light the fireworks. As we continued, the feeling of being followed lingered, like an invisible presence was urging us to leave. After about 10 minutes, we found a clearing and started setting up. But even here, the unease wouldn't leave us. As M and I crouched to arrange the fireworks, C stood a few steps away, staring into the trees. When I asked what was wrong, he said, in a voice unlike his own, "I can sense the fear." His words sent a chill through me. Before we could process what he meant, an ear-piercing screech shattered the silence. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard. A mix of a growl, a grunt, and irregular, labored breathing. It wasn't an animal. Whatever it was, it felt wrong. We turned to look, but there was nothing there. The area was illuminated, giving us a clear view of our surroundings. Yet the sound had been so close. It was the final straw. We grabbed the fireworks and ran, heading straight back to C's house. None of us slept that night. Later, M confessed that from the moment we entered the forest, he felt like we were being watched by something malicious. He also admitted that when he was standing apart from us earlier, he had seen a large, shadowy figure in the distance. We stayed up until dawn, going over what had happened, but we couldn't make sense of it. It was something beyond explanation, something evil. Before I was born, my mother and my 3 older brothers lived in a house on a quiet, sloped street. There were other houses nearby, but the area was peaceful. Normally, I wouldn't believe in things like ghosts or the paranormal, but some of the things I've experienced have made me question everything. Years before I was born, my mother had a boyfriend before she met my dad. I don't know much about him, except that after their breakup, he took his own life. The only detail I know is that during their final argument, he wanted her to die with him. She refused because she had her 3 sons to care for. After he passed, my mom left that house and moved away. She met my dad, and my little sister and I were born. For years, our life was normal. Nothing strange happened. We lived in a caravan park and went to school like any other kids. But things changed when we were forced to leave the park because we had a dog. My mom refused to give the dog up, so we packed our things and left. That decision turned our lives upside down. My mom began using drugs. My dad's life spiraled. and we ended up homeless for nearly 2 years, bouncing between schools and even homeschooling for a while. It was a tough time for all of us. Eventually, the Department of Housing gave us a place to live. To our surprise, it was the same house my mom had lived in years before, the one where her ex-boyfriend had passed away. She didn't say anything about the connection at first, and we were just happy to have a roof over our heads. But Mom avoided the back room entirely. It wasn't until later that I learned why. She couldn't face the memories tied to that place. Before we moved in, the house had been trashed by the previous tenants. The walls were covered in writing, the floors were torn up, and the place was infested with rats and cockroaches. Workers came in to fix it up before we moved in, repainting and laying down new carpets. Still, the house felt off. After a few months, strange things started happening. We heard knocking sounds coming from the back room. That room was always freezing cold, even in the middle of summer. Anytime you stepped inside, you felt like someone was watching you. None of us liked being in there. Years later, when I was in 7th grade, my little sister and I were home alone one day. Mom was out shopping. We were vacuuming when the dogs started barking like crazy outside. I turned off the vacuum to check, and as usual, they were barking at the neighbor's dog. After calming them down, I went back inside, only to hear the vacuum cleaner running again. I was sure I'd turned it off. Confused, I shut it off once more and tried to brush it off. A week later, my sister was home alone and filmed her puppy barking at a corner in the lounge room near our old bookcase. When she showed me the video, I realized it was the same corner where the vacuum had turned itself on. That corner gave me chills. Things only got stranger. One evening, my girlfriend's cousins visited, and one of them brought a friend who claimed to be psychic. She said the house felt wrong, and when she passed by earlier, she saw a figure looking out the front window. She described it as full of anger and sadness. When Mom told her about her ex-boyfriend, the psychic looked shocked. We talked about all the weird things happening, but no one had answers. Other strange events followed. A candle once set fire to a stool near that same corner, even though there was no way it could have reached the cloth. The toilet flushed itself constantly, and while the housing department blamed the pipes, it felt like something else. We got so used to it that it didn't bother us anymore. Even our friends accepted it as normal. At night, I sometimes saw a small white orb floating at the end of my bed, in the kitchen, or in the hallway. I never saw it anywhere else. There were also noises in the walls, like tiny footsteps. In the laundry, there was a manhole in the ceiling. The lid would disappear and reappear randomly, which was unsettling. My sister heard tapping on her piano late at night. She was too scared to turn around, worried she'd see someone there. When I stayed in her room, I'd feel something touch my back or play with my hair. The tapping never stopped. Now I live with my grandmother, but strange things still happen. The other night, I heard groaning sounds coming from the kitchen. My grandmother, a deeply religious woman, insisted it was nothing. Her house, she says, is a house of the Lord. I want to believe her, but I can't shake the feeling that something is following me. One time, I was in the bathroom while my sister had her music lesson. The lights flickered, then went out completely. I couldn't see anything and struggled to find the door. Then the lights suddenly came back on. I don't know if what I've experienced is paranormal or if there's some logical explanation, but I've seen and heard too much to ignore it. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. This is my first time sharing a story like this. I've never really believed in the supernatural. I've always thought there had to be a logical explanation for everything. But recently, something happened to me that I can't explain, and it really scared me. Here's what happened. In my neighborhood, there's this old building across the railway tracks. One day, I convinced my cousin to explore it with me. At the time, it just seemed like a fun little adventure. The building was mostly empty, just piles of junk, old machinery, and bottles. But then I found something unusual. A mirror, almost in perfect condition. I decided to take it home. I'm a fine art student, and I've been wanting to experiment with painting on different surfaces like glass and mirrors. It's hard to find materials like that for cheap, so this mirror felt like a lucky find. Once I got home, I cleaned it up and removed the frame. That night, I started working on it, painting a self-portrait with oil paints directly onto the mirror's surface. When I was done, I left it to dry on a tarp on my bedroom floor. Before I went to bed around midnight, I looked at it and thought it turned out really well. Everything seemed fine. But in the morning, I was shocked. The mirror was scratched, deep, deliberate marks that hadn't been there before. The scratches were clean and precise, running down the surface in straight lines before curving back in loops. In some spots, the lines crossed each other, forming a diamond-like pattern. There were also small prick marks, as if something sharp had been pressed against the surface. It was nothing like I'd ever seen before. I couldn't figure it out. The marks weren't random. They looked like they'd been made with a tool, something with multiple, evenly spaced prongs, like a tiny rake. But nothing in my room could have made those scratches. I checked all my paintbrushes and tools. They were clean and undamaged. The tarp underneath the mirror was also torn, even though it had been brand new and I'd been careful with it. The same tiny prick marks were around the tier. At first, I thought maybe an animal had done it, but my windows and door had been shut tight all night. My room is part of a newer extension, so there aren't any holes or gaps where something could get in. Even if an animal had somehow made it inside, there were no paw prints or fur anywhere, and the scratches were too precise for a small animal to make. I wondered if the scratches had been part of the mirror all along and just became visible under the paint. But they extended beyond the painted area, and you could see where paint had been dragged along the lines. It didn't make sense. I live with my mom and my grandma. They're both serious people who don't play pranks, especially not with my art. When I showed them what had happened, they were just as confused as I was. I even thought maybe I had done it in my sleep, but that seemed impossible. I've never sleepwalked, and my room was full of paint tins and jars. If I'd been wandering around, I would have knocked something over. Besides, I'd have had to go all the way to the kitchen, find something to make the scratches, use it, and then put it back, all without waking my mom, whose room is right by the kitchen. It just didn't add up. The whole thing left me feeling unsettled. I moved the mirror to the shed in the backyard and tried to forget about it. But every time I go into the shed now, I feel uneasy, like there's something wrong with the space. Maybe it's just in my head because of what happened, but it's hard to shake the feeling. My partner and I have been living in a small house in Western Australia for about a year now. The house was built in the 1970s, but we haven't really looked into its history or learned much about the previous owners. This particular incident happened one night, about 3 months after we moved in. I had just come home from a late shift at work. I'm a carer, so my hours can be unusual. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I got home, and my partner was already asleep in our bedroom. I decided to relax and watch some TV on the couch in the living room. The couch I was lying on is against the wall, with the TV cabinet directly opposite. To the right of the TV is the doorway that leads to the hallway and our bedroom. I must have dozed off pretty quickly because the next thing I remember, I woke up and it was early morning. Around 2:30 a.m. I woke up to the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it must be my partner. But then, almost instantly, I felt this awful sensation, like I was being watched. It was such a heavy, uncomfortable feeling that I instinctively looked around. That's when I saw her. A woman was standing just outside the hallway, not moving or doing anything, just standing there. I couldn't make out her face, but I could tell she was slender and wearing a long dress. She didn't make a sound or move at all. She just stood there, and I felt frozen with shock. It seemed like an eternity, but it was probably only a few seconds. I looked away for just a moment, and when I glanced back, she was gone. It had been years since I'd experienced anything paranormal, but this shook me to my core. I wasn't tired at all after that, so I stayed up watching TV for another hour, trying to calm myself down. Eventually, I decided it was time to go to bed. I always leave the bathroom light on at night so I can see if I need to get up. So I turned off everything else and headed to the bedroom. When I got there, I noticed my partner was sleeping on his back. That immediately struck me as odd because he always sleeps on his side. As I stood there, I heard a woman's voice. It wasn't clear enough for me to understand what she was saying, but it was unmistakably a woman's voice. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop. My partner's mouth was moving. He was speaking, but the voice coming out of him wasn't his. My partner has a deep, masculine voice that I could never mistake for anyone else's, but this voice was soft, female, and completely different. She only said a sentence or two, but I couldn't make out the words. I think I was too scared to fully process what I was hearing. Her tone felt heavy and sad, and her presence filled the room with a deep, unsettling weight. I didn't get the sense that she was evil, but she certainly didn't feel like a happy spirit. I stood there, frozen in fear, until the voice stopped. My partner remained fast asleep, completely unaware of what had just happened. I eventually forced myself to get into bed, but I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I told my partner what had happened. He brushed it off, saying it was probably just my imagination, but I know what I saw and heard. It wasn't his voice I woke up to. It was hers. Since that night, I haven't experienced anything quite as intense. Every now and then, I'll hear footsteps, but she hasn't spoken through my partner again. Still, the memory of that night stays with me. I often think about it, and I can't shake the fear that she might come back. I've tried looking up information about ghosts speaking through people, but I haven't found much. Who was this woman, and why did she choose to speak through my partner? A few nights ago, I went out with my friends to see a movie and relax. We had just finished our exams and wanted to have some fun. But from the very start of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us. It all started on the train. I was riding with my friend Jamie on our way to the mall to meet the rest of the group. As we stopped at the station before ours, I noticed something strange. There was a dark figure standing on the platform outside. It was hard to make out any details. It looked like a shadowy, blackish shape with no clear face. The station was small and out in the open, so it was already dark. But this figure stood out in a way I couldn't explain. I tried to brush it off, thinking I was just stressed, and kept chatting with Jamie. When we arrived at the mall, we met up with the rest of our friends. There were 7 of us in total, and decided to grab dinner before the movie. We were sitting at a cafe, talking and laughing, when I saw it again. Through the window, outside the cafe, was that same shadowy figure. This time, it raised its arm before disappearing. As soon as it vanished, the waiter carrying our drinks dropped the entire tray. What was really strange was how it happened. It looked as if something had forcefully knocked the tray out of his hands. That made me feel uneasy, but I didn't say anything and tried to act normal. We finished dinner and headed to the theater. Once we got inside, we realized we were the only ones there. We decided to spread out in the empty rows, lining up behind each other in different seats. It felt fun at first, but halfway through the movie, I saw the figure again. This time, it was standing near the emergency exit by the screen. I leaned over to my friend Emily and whispered, "Look over there." She glanced toward the exit, but just rolled her eyes and told me to stop joking around. When I looked back, it was gone. I tried to focus on the movie, but then I heard faint whispers. At first, I thought it was my friend Ketcha sitting behind me, so I turned around. But she was focused on the screen, not saying a word. I faced forward again, brushing it off, but the whispers came back. This time, they were right in my ear. I couldn't make out everything, but it sounded like someone saying either "watch this" or "watch out." My whole body froze. I couldn't move. I just kept my eyes on the screen, trying to block it out. Eventually, the whispers stopped. When the movie ended, my friends started talking about how cold it had gotten in the theater. That sent a chill down my spine, because the cold seemed to hit around the same time I saw the figure near the screen. Then my friend Stella mentioned that her neck was hurting. She lifted her hair to show us, and we saw 2 dark bruises on the back of her neck. The bruises were fresh, and she swore they hadn't been there earlier that day. I still have no idea what that figure was or if I'm losing my mind. All I know is that the entire night I felt watched. It wasn't until I got home that I finally felt safe again. I'm 15 years old and I'm a girl. I've never really had any ghostly experiences before, but what's been happening recently has left me scared and confused. I'm sharing this in the hopes that someone can help or give me advice. Just knowing someone knows about what I've been going through gives me some comfort. The first time I noticed anything strange was about 3 or 4 months ago. It started when I was trying to fall asleep. Out of nowhere, I'd get this overwhelming feeling of dread and fear, as if someone was in the room with me. I'd turn on my bedside lamp and look around, but there was never anyone there. Even though I wouldn't see anything, I couldn't go back to sleep. I was too scared that the feeling might come back. I eventually realized this always seemed to happen close to 4:00 a.m., and it kept happening, at least 3 nights a week. It still happens sometimes, but not as often now. A few weeks after this started, I began to notice strange things in the corner of my eye. It happens a lot, even now. I'll see what looks like a small figure, like a child, but other times I see something bigger, a tall, dark figure, like a man. But as soon as I turn to look, it disappears. At first, I thought it was just my imagination or something everyone probably sees, but now I'm sure it's not normal. I see these figures mostly at home, but sometimes at school or even in public places. Back then, I didn't think about ghosts. I just thought I was being silly. For weeks, I wasn't sleeping well. I kept seeing things, and I was starting to feel really afraid. But over the past week, things have gotten worse. 3 days ago, I was at a friend's house. The dark figures kept appearing over and over. I started to feel sick, so my friends suggested I take a nap in one of the bedrooms. They closed the curtains to make it dark, and I lay down. I didn't fall into a deep sleep. I was just drifting off lightly, but I had a dream or vision that scared me so much. In the dream, there wasn't any action or movement. I was just staring at an old black and white photo of a little girl. Her face was dirty and bruised, and she looked incredibly sad. Then I noticed her eyes. They were bright blue, and it felt like they were staring straight at me. I woke up gasping and shaking. When I closed my eyes again, I saw the same image, clear as day. I told my friends about it, but they didn't take me seriously. Last night, though, was the scariest experience yet. I was up late watching TV by myself. All the lights were off, so the only light came from the TV. I kept seeing the tall, dark figure standing in the kitchen. I tried to ignore it, and even mentally told it to go away. Then I started hearing noises outside. After that, I heard something crawling under the coffee table right in front of me. I froze. I couldn't move. I just stared at the table, waiting for the noise to stop. When it finally did, I was still too scared to move. I went to bed soon after. For some reason, I felt like I needed to try communicating with the ghost. I didn't say anything. I just put my hand out of the bed and focused my thoughts. Then I felt it. A cold sensation came over my thumb, like someone was holding it. That's when I realized the ghost might be a little girl. All day today, I've felt like someone is watching me. I even feel like she's watching me right now. Before I started typing, I felt a strong sense of discouragement, almost like someone didn't want me to share this story. But I pushed through it and wrote it down anyway. I think the little girl is with me, but I don't know what she wants. And I still don't understand the tall, dark figure. My childhood home was nearly 100 years old, tucked deep into the bushland, far back from the road. The only way to reach it was by following a winding driveway through eucalyptus trees, ferns, and camphor laurel. It felt hidden, almost like a secret, nestled into the forested hillside. Even nature seemed to take over the house. 6-foot pythons lived in the ceiling, and once we found an 11-foot snake skin. We moved in when I was 4 years old. I remember the giant mango tree in the backyard, older than the house itself. One day, while standing with my mother in the outdoor laundry, I noticed a little boy near the tree. He was dressed all in white, kicking through the leaves as if he was looking for something. He didn't look at me or even glance up. I was excited to make a new friend, so I ran to my room and put on colorful plastic bangles to dress up for him. But when I came back, he was gone. I asked my mother, who was still by the laundry, where the boy had gone. She looked at me strangely and said she hadn't seen anyone. It didn't make sense. There was only one way onto the property, surrounded by thick bushland on 3 sides, and anyone coming from the road would have been in plain view. Even at that young age, I knew it was unlikely someone had just wandered in unnoticed. My little brother's room was at the back of the house, overlooking the forest and a winding path. He was only 2 when we moved in, but by the time he was 4, he started telling me about footsteps outside his window at night. He mentioned seeing a lady running up the path, but she'd vanish so quickly that he wasn't sure she was real. My brother was a quiet kid, not one for making things up, so I believed him. By the time I was 6, I was convinced our house was haunted. One night as we were being put to bed, my brother knocked on my door, pale and shaking. He said he'd heard voices at his window. That night, one of the voices had called his name. He was so scared that I told him he could sleep in my room, and he did. Even now, as an adult, he backs up that story. He's 29 now, and I still believe him. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I learned our parents believed us all along. They had their own reasons to be uneasy in that house. For instance, my dad built a veranda onto the kitchen, knocking out the old back door in the process. Before the door was removed, you could smell kerosene burning in the kitchen at night, even though there was no kerosene in the house. After the door was gone, the smell never came back. There were other strange events. One night, we heard a loud gunshot outside the back door. My parents exchanged a look, and my dad grabbed his gun, turned off the lights, and told us to stay inside. He searched but found no one, and even our dogs, who would normally bark at anything, were completely silent. As a child, I noticed something odd when walking our kelpies before school. There was a spot on the hill, right at the edge of the forest, where the dogs would stop, bark, and refuse to go any further. In my own way, I believed someone lived there, someone lonely. I even gave him a name and left food and drawings for him. I hoped I was helping in my own small way. Years later, after my parents divorced and sold the house, my dad told me something chilling. One night, as he lay in bed with my stepmother, she saw a man standing in the doorway. He looked aboriginal and was just staring at them. She quietly asked my dad if he saw the man too, and in the dark, he softly replied, "Yes," in the doorway. Dad sold the house not long after, saying it just didn't feel right anymore. Strangely enough, I ended up renting that same house years later. I was looking for a home in the forest where I could have a garden and a cat. When I saw the house was up for rent, it felt like fate. Moving back in felt strange though, especially knowing its history. On the first night before the power was turned on, my boyfriend and I sat in the kitchen. It was midwinter, cold and dark, with the wind howling outside. Through the large glass doors overlooking the yard, I saw something white and translucent float up the stairs and across the veranda. I froze, hoping I'd imagined it. But when my boyfriend turned to me and said, "You saw that too," I knew it was real. We spent that night in the middle of the house, surrounded by candles, too spooked to leave. Later, when 2 of his friends moved in, one took my brother's old room. He told us he heard footsteps outside his window every night. I never had the heart to tell him about the voice that once whispered my brother's name through that same window. As time went on, more strange things happened. My cat would hiss at things I couldn't see, and my pet python would strike at empty air. Once, while holding a hand-raised bird for a friend, it suddenly panicked, shrieking and flying into the windows until it escaped outside. There was no explanation. I also had recurring dreams about a little girl with dark eyes and a sad face. She always appeared in the same spot where the kelpies used to bark. She never spoke or revealed anything about the house. She would just look at me. When we moved out, I never dreamed of her again. It was like a switch had been turned off. Before leaving, I performed a cleansing and prayed for the spirits of the house. It was a beautiful place to grow up, but its history felt heavy, like tree sap clinging to its roots. I hope the spirits I encountered found peace and light. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. A few months ago, my partner Brad's mother needed help paying rent, so she decided to rent out a room in her house. After a couple of weeks, a man named Jason moved in. I don't live with Brad, so Jason had been there for about a week before I met him. To give you some background, Brad's mother's house is in a quiet suburb in Palmerston. It's a small house, but it feels warm and inviting. Brad's mom is divorced and decorated it in her own cozy style. As for me, I'm a Christian. Brad and his mom aren't religious, but they've always respected my beliefs, and I've never pushed my faith on them. The first time I met Jason was strange. When I arrived at Brad's house, he met me outside and told me his mom had finally rented out the room. He was excited because he was tired of people coming by to look at it. As we walked to the house, I suddenly felt sick, a heavy, almost crushing feeling on my chest and shoulders. It was so bad that Brad had to get me a glass of water while I leaned against the wall. Once I drank the water, I felt a little better, and we went inside, joking about how weird it was. Brad introduced me to Jason, who looked to be in his 40s. He was skinny, not very tall, and missing his front teeth. Honestly, he gave me the creeps, but I reminded myself not to judge and tried to be polite. When we shook hands, something strange happened. Goosebumps ran down both our arms, and I felt a chill. It made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. Later, I told Brad about how I felt sick and about the weird handshake. He thought I might be coming down with something, so I let it go and didn't think much more about it. But then things started to change. Brad and his mom began fighting constantly, which was unusual. Brad got sick almost every week, and every plant in the house started dying, one by one. Brad also started sleeping for absurdly long hours, sometimes until 2 a.m., and even began sleepwalking. The house itself felt different, heavier. Jason was becoming stranger too. He shaved his head, revealing tattoos of demons clawing at his skull. One day, he took off his shirt, and I saw pentagrams and other satanic symbols aimed on his body. He blacked out the windows in his room and installed a deadbolt on the door. Then, last week, I saw blood on the kitchen floor leading to his room. Brad said Jason had cut his arm, but the sight of it freaked me out. Meanwhile, I still felt sick every time I entered the house. For my birthday, Brad gave me a gold cross with tiny diamonds. It was beautiful, and I wore it all the time. I noticed that I didn't feel as sick when I had the cross on. I felt like it was protecting me. But when Jason saw the cross, he got angry and told me to take it off, saying it shouldn't be worn in his house. Brad quickly stepped in and reminded Jason whose house it really was, saying I had every right to wear my cross. Jason just glared at me and said, "Try the other team. It has better benefits." His words rattled me. After that, I only visited when Jason wasn't home. One night, Jason was supposed to be out, so Brad and I planned a movie night. But Jason came home drunk, yelling about how his life was ruined because he sold it. I don't know what he meant by it, but the way he said it was disturbing. He locked himself in his room, and we could hear him yelling. Then we smelled smoke. Brad banged on the door, telling him he couldn't smoke inside, but everything went quiet after that. Not long after, Jason left the house carrying a large brown book. It didn't have any strange symbols on it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to go home because Jason frightened me, especially in that state. As Brad walked me to my car, we leaned against it, talking. Out of nowhere, Brad looked toward Jason's room. In the window, we saw a man with red eyes, his hands pressed against the glass. What was terrifying was that Jason had blacked out the windows, so we shouldn't have been able to see anything. Brad ran back inside, convinced someone was in the house. I begged him not to go into Jason's room, but he was determined. When he opened the door, I was hit with the same crushing, sick feeling I'd had the first time I came to the house. It was overwhelming, fear, dread, and hatred all at once. Inside the room, the windows were still blacked out, but in the middle of the room was a table covered in a black cloth. That was it, nothing else. When Brad opened the closet door, the room's light flickered rapidly before the bulb blew out. I screamed at him to leave, and we ran to my car, waiting for his mom to come home. As soon as I was outside, the heavy feeling lifted. I haven't been able to go back since. Brad is still living there, but he's sicker than ever. The doctors blame his smoking, but I'm convinced something else is going on. I want to get him out of that house, or get Jason out, but we can't afford our own place, and my dad won't let Brad stay at my house. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel. This story takes me back to a good time in my life, a time I often think about with a smile. It was during a chapter filled with excitement and discovery, just before some truly scary things began to unfold. As a teenager, I had a group of friends who loved to explore haunted places. We started out in grade 9, checking out local hotspots and graveyards. But by grade 11, things began to get strange. We'd visited many graveyards, some active, some historic. Most nights, not much happened, but occasionally, we experienced things that made our hair stand on end. My social life was tightly woven into these adventures. While many friends came and went, only a few stuck around for the truly scary moments. One of them was a girl who seemed fearless no matter what happened. She was beautiful in a girl next door way, but with a touch of mystery. Her smile could light up any room, and she had this easygoing charm that drew everyone in. She knew how to keep up with the boys, always ready for fun, and I quickly fell for her. Before long, she and I naturally paired off. Looking back, I think she only came along on those adventures because I was there, and truthfully, I was mostly there because of her. The more time we spent together, the closer we became. Eventually, we began dating, but even before that, we had already formed a bond. We talked about everything, from the stars and the universe to ghosts and the afterlife. She lived in an apartment building where later we would experiment with Ouija seances. But even before those experiments, strange things seemed to surround her. She often mentioned feeling watched, hearing footsteps, or noticing odd movements in her room or the bathroom. She'd take long, hot showers, and when the mirror fogged up, she'd sometimes see streaks that looked like figures moving behind her. Occasionally, she'd scream, startling her dad. At first, I didn't pay much attention to these stories. I was too focused on her. But after a while, I started feeling the same things, like we were being watched. Even during our private moments, I'd catch glimpses of shadows or feel an unnatural presence. She seemed used to it and would brush it off, but I couldn't ignore it. One night we had the house to ourselves. Her parents were visiting family, so we took the opportunity to spend the night together. We stayed up late, talking and laughing until exhaustion took over. As I lay in her bed, I felt an overwhelming sense that something wasn't right. The room seemed to creak and shift, as though someone was walking around. I tried to sleep but eventually gave up and moved to the floor with a pillow and blanket. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a muffled moan. Groggy, I opened my eyes and saw her shifting under the covers. At first, I thought she was having a vivid dream. Then I noticed something else. A shadow hovering above her bed. It wasn't like anything I'd seen before. It moved with purpose, as if it had its own will. The moment I focused on it, the shadow darted to a corner of the room, blending into the darkness. I sat there, stunned, unsure of what to do. When I told her about it the next morning, she didn't seem to believe me at first, but I could tell it unsettled her. She began taking precautions, placing trinkets in her room and sprinkling salt along the perimeter to ward off spirits. For a while, things seemed to calm down, but then we found an Ouija board. That brought trouble back into our lives. Looking back, I can't help but think she attracted these strange occurrences. She seemed to be a magnet for paranormal activity. After we broke up, I never experienced anything like it again. I can only hope that those shadowy entities left her alone eventually. It still makes me wonder, are some people just naturally magnets for the supernatural? I've always had experiences with the supernatural, starting from the age of 5 when I first saw my grandfather in our basement on the day he passed away. I remember being confused because, at his funeral, I couldn't understand how he could be both at our house and lying lifeless in the casket. That memory stayed with me, and as a child, it scared me deeply. For years after that, I seemed to shut out any supernatural encounters. It wasn't until my teenage years, when I started experimenting with Ouija boards, that these experiences came rushing back. I wouldn't recommend Ouija boards to anyone. They open your home to spirits, most of which are unwelcome. Once I began using one, the activity in my house intensified. Almost every night, I'd hear shuffling footsteps outside my door. It sounded like someone was walking up, stopping at the doorway, and then leaving. At first, I assumed it was my mother checking on me, and I kept my eyes shut to avoid a conversation about why I was still awake. But one night, I decided to sit up and look, only to find an empty doorway. No one was there. This continued for weeks. Each time I gathered the courage to look, I'd find the same empty doorway. No explanation, just the same eerie feeling. One evening, I was on the phone when I heard a loud crash from the basement. It was so loud, I thought the TV had fallen. As I set the phone down to investigate, I heard another crash upstairs. My friend, who was still on the line, heard it too. But when I checked both areas, everything was perfectly normal. Nothing had fallen or moved. That night, the old stove timer started ringing on its own, even though it required someone to physically push and turn it to activate. This happened several times afterward, and when I finally told my mom, she admitted she had experienced the same thing. She said there were nights when my brother and I weren't home, and she'd wake up to the sound of the oven timer. One morning, my mom confronted my brother and me, saying, "You're too old to be crawling into my bed after nightmares." We were baffled. Neither of us had done any such thing. She led us to her bedroom, where the covers on one side of the bed were pulled back, and there was a clear impression in the pillow, as if someone had been sleeping there. My mom is a sound sleeper and barely moves in her sleep, let alone disturbs the opposite side of the bed. She eventually convinced herself it was her father's spirit and chose not to speak about it again. During this time, I continued using the Ouija board, hoping for answers. Instead, I attracted negative spirits. One spirit, a woman named Betsy, spelled out hamster during a session. Within seconds, my hamster let out a loud squeal from another room. When I went to check on her, she bit me repeatedly, something she had never done before. That was my breaking point. I yelled for all the spirits to leave my house and my life. I haven't touched a Ouija board since, and soon after, the activity in the house faded, allowing me to finally get a decent night's sleep. Now, as an adult, I've seen two spirits with my own eyes. The first was a man who walked through the closed door of a restaurant in broad daylight. Even though I saw it happen, it took me a moment to realize what I had witnessed. The second was late at night while I was driving with my brother. I saw a man dart across the street and angrily commented on why someone would run out like that at 3 a.m. But as I looked closer, I realized he had no legs. He was a blur from the waist down. My brother saw nothing. In recent years, I've started dreaming about people who have passed. These dreams are vivid and unsettling, with graphic details. Once, I dreamt of a man shooting himself in the head. Another time, I saw a girl who had been beaten, crying on a set of bleachers. The dreams are so detailed, I remember every feature of their faces and every piece of clothing they wore. Yet I've never met these people. A medium once told me I have an ability I've been suppressing for years. According to her, these spirits have been waiting to communicate with me, following me like an entourage. But here's the problem. They never speak. Even when I've tried reaching out, the results have been terrifying. One night, I dreamt of my grandfather following me from one dream to another. Desperate for answers, I finally yelled at him, demanding to know what he wanted. The entire room shook violently, but only in the dream. I woke up shaken and with no answers, only more questions. This happened to me a few years ago, and even now, I try not to think about it. Parts of it still feel foggy or unreal, almost like my mind is blocking it out. I guess I've been too afraid to reflect on it deeply. Maybe I've convinced myself that if I don't think about it, it won't matter. But recently, I've started questioning why I'm so skeptical of things, especially something I know I experienced. Here's my story. Make of it what you will. I was sleeping over at a friend's house. She lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment with her mother, who worked nights and wasn't home, and her younger brother, who usually kept to himself. The apartment had a strange layout. A large, open living area made up most of the space, with the kitchen on one side and a hallway leading to the bathroom and bedrooms. There was a triangular wall separating the kitchen and living room. From where I was standing that night, I could see and hear everyone in the house. There was no way anyone could sneak up on me. It was a warm summer evening, and we were watching a ghost movie, nothing unusual for us. My friend had gone to the bathroom and her brother was sitting on the couch, fully engrossed in the TV. I was standing in the kitchen, talking on the phone with either my mom or my boyfriend at the time, when I felt it. At first, it was just a sensation. A soft touch running down my back like the tip of a finger. I was wearing a tank top and my hair was pulled over my left shoulder, so the touch was clear, running down the right side of my back. My immediate thought was that it was my friend playing a prank, but then I realized she was still in the bathroom. Her brother was still on the couch, visible from where I stood. Then I heard it, a voice whispering my name. It wasn't loud, but it felt like it was everywhere, surrounding me. The voice was soft and almost caressing, but it sent chills through my entire body. It wasn't distinctly male or female, but if I had to guess, I'd say it sounded more masculine. In that moment, I couldn't move. I felt frozen, sick, and completely terrified. The voice seemed to invade my entire being like it knew me. It felt deeply personal, and I hated it. I told myself if I ignore it, it'll go away. But the feeling didn't leave. Time seemed to stop, though it must have only been a minute. My friend's brother was still watching TV, unaware of anything unusual. I called out to my friend, and she answered from the bathroom, confirming she hadn't left. I felt helpless, like I was losing my mind. I wanted it to be my imagination, but I knew something had been there. Something that touched me, whispered my name, and somehow knew I was vulnerable. I quickly ended my phone call, trying to stay calm. When my friend came out of the bathroom, she immediately noticed something was wrong. "Are you okay?" she asked. I shook my head and brushed it off, saying, "It's nothing. I'll tell you later." She must have thought I had an argument with my mom or boyfriend, as that wasn't unusual. I didn't want to talk about it, not yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I decided to sleep on the floor, next to my friend's mattress, instead of on the couch in her room, which was near her permanently open closet. That closet always creeped me out, especially because it housed an old spirit board we had bought as a joke years ago. Though it never worked for us before, I couldn't help but feel uneasy knowing it was there. The next day, both of us were jittery and exhausted. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I approached sleep, I'd feel like something was pulling me back, whispering my name again and again, keeping me awake. I've never been so relieved to leave someone's house. Since then, I've had time to reflect. I've experienced sleep paralysis nightmares as a child. Repeated, vivid, and terrifying. But I could always write them off as dreams. This was different. I was awake, standing in a brightly lit home with other people around. That setting made it so much worse. It wasn't a dream. It felt real. And that's what terrifies me the most. I wanted to share this with others who might understand or have experienced something similar. Do you think it could have been real? I've felt things before, but I've never been touched or heard my name whispered like that. It's something I can't explain, and it still gives me chills. Let me start by saying I'm not sure if I believe in ghosts. I believe in vibes, good or bad, coming from people, places, or situations, and those vibes tend to be right most of the time. But when it comes to the supernatural, I'm on the fence. Recently, my girlfriend, 3 friends, and I moved into a house we're renting. We're all either students or working full-time, so we were looking for something cheap. We found this pretty big house not far from school and downtown. The rent was unusually low, just $250 each, while most places in the area are $400 to $500 per person. At first, we thought it was just because the house was old and hadn't been renovated much, aside from a few necessary updates. We moved in on November 30th, and almost immediately, some of us started feeling uneasy. A few friends who helped us move said the house gave off bad vibes. One girl even refused to step into the hallway leading to the basement. My girlfriend also felt uneasy, but we brushed it off, thinking it was just the atmosphere of an old house. The house itself is unusual. It's a 1.5-story building with low, slanted ceilings upstairs. The lighting is old-fashioned, sticking out from the walls on fixtures. Though the wiring was updated a few years ago, it still uses fuses. The basement is tiny and only accessible through a trapdoor. Down there, you'll find just the furnace, water heater, and fuse box. Since moving in, all of us have experienced strange things. At first, we chalked it up to the quirks of an old house and living with 5 people in close quarters. But tonight, while 3 of us were hanging out, we started talking about these experiences. After doing some research, we're starting to believe our house might be haunted, or at least something is going on. Here's what's happened so far. The temperature in the house is inconsistent and varies from room to room. My bedroom, for instance, is always extreme. It's either very hot or freezing cold. The kitchen is consistently colder than the rest of the house, while the living room's temperature changes depending on where you're standing. We tried blaming it on everyone adjusting the thermostat, but our thermostat has never gone beyond the 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit range. On 2 occasions, the living room lights flickered for no apparent reason. We fiddled with the dimmer switch, turned them on and off, but the flickering only stopped on its own. In the garage, which is detached, I went to clean up after a party one night. The light was so dim I could barely see. After a few minutes, it suddenly became as bright as usual. While I was in there, I couldn't shake the weird feeling that something was off. 2 of my roommates have mentioned hearing noises from the hallway that connects to the trapdoor. Last week, while they were smoking in the kitchen, the trapdoor slammed shut on its own. None of us use the side door in that hallway, even though it's convenient. We can't explain why, but the room gives off such bad vibes that I personally avoid it, especially at night. Right now, it's just being used for storage since we don't have laundry machines yet. A few nights ago, around 5 a.m., I went downstairs to use the bathroom. I decided to take some dishes down with me, but didn't turn on the lights to avoid waking my girlfriend. When I reached the top of the stairs, I heard rustling and a weird growling or chewing noise coming from the bottom. I panicked, ran back to my room, and woke my girlfriend. We stayed in the room until daylight, too scared to leave. We've had several electronics issues. The internet randomly cuts out for my computer and my girlfriend's, but not for anyone else's. A wireless printer stopped working, and one roommate's computer broke the day after we moved in. It had to be repaired. Some outlets only work sporadically, and last week I blew a fuse while cooking. After replacing it twice, the same thing happened until my roommate helped, and then it worked fine. Things constantly seem out of place. Every time I walk into the kitchen, it feels like everything has been rearranged. This morning, I couldn't find my USB stick on the table, but when my girlfriend checked, it was right there. People lose their phones, wallets, and keys all the time in this house. Once I couldn't find my wallet, which I always keep in my coat. I left the house without it, but when I checked my pocket down the street, it was there. Our landlords are strange. They're a couple in their early 50s and swingers. They don't necessarily give off bad vibes, but there's something unsettling about them. It feels like they're hiding something. Almost everyone in the house has felt like they're not alone or like they're being watched. My girlfriend especially refuses to go downstairs alone at night. These feelings have only grown stronger in the past few days. I don't know what to make of all this. Most of these things have logical explanations, but it's hard to ignore the pattern. Is there something here? Should we be worried? I'm still unsure whether I believe in ghosts, but the more these things happen, the harder it is to dismiss. What do you think? Are we imagining it, or is something really going on here? This happened when I was in my early 20s, about 5 or 6 years ago. I was living alone in an apartment in Montreal. At the time, I had just gone through a breakup. It wasn't a long relationship, but I was still pretty bummed out about it. I moved into the apartment in July, and not long after, I started noticing something strange. I'd hear the sound my phone makes when I get a text message, but when I checked, there wouldn't be any messages. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, so I just brushed it off. That October, after the breakup, I got a pair of finches to keep me company. They were funny little creatures, big fans of Ella Fitzgerald and the Beatles, but not too keen on Nirvana. One day, I let them out of their cage and sat on my bed, playing guitar and singing a song I'd written called The Ghost in the Wall. The song was a metaphor inspired by an earlier breakup, but it had nothing to do with the boyfriend I'd just broken up with. Ironically, when we were together, he used to whistle along to it whenever I played it, even though I doubt he knew it was about someone else. So there I was, strumming my guitar, with my finches perched nearby, when suddenly I heard whistling. It sounded exactly like how my ex used to whistle along with that song. I froze, startled, and stopped playing. My finches just sat there staring at me, completely quiet. The whistling I'd heard didn't sound like them at all. It was distinctly human. One of my birds had a chirpy sound, and the other had a harsh squawk. Neither of them could make a sound even close to human whistling. I wondered if my ex was visiting a neighbor he was friends with a few of them, and maybe heard me playing, deciding to whistle along as a prank. But the sound didn't seem to be coming from another apartment or even another room. It felt like it was in the room with me. My windows were closed because it was cold, and even if they'd been open, I doubt I could have heard whistling that clearly from outside. After that, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. A few nights later, while lying in bed, I started hearing a strange buzzing noise. It was faint at first, but I realized it was coming from my bedroom wall. When I pressed my ear to the wall, I could hear what sounded like music. It reminded me of the experimental electronic sounds at the end of the song, The Widow by Mars Volta. A friend had sent me a mixed CD a year earlier with that song on it, and I'd been listening to it a lot lately. The music in the wall sounded eerily similar to that experimental section of the song. Confused, I decided to talk to a friend who I knew would believe me. There was a wood panel screwed onto one of my walls, and I felt like I needed to see what was behind it. I'd read enough ghost stories to imagine finding something dramatic, like old photographs or a diary. My friend came over to help, and when we unscrewed the panel, all we found were pipes and cobwebs. The panel was probably just there to allow access to the bathroom plumbing. After we finished, we heard the buzzing noise again. My friend put her ear to the wall, this time a different one, and after a few seconds, she gasped and jumped back. Her reaction freaked me out. "What is it?" I asked. She told me to listen for myself. When I put my ear to the wall, I could hear the same music, but then I also heard someone breathing. It was so close, it felt like it was right in my ear. I jerked away, covering my mouth in shock. My friend just nodded, as if to say, "Yeah, I heard it too." We left the room, standing in the hallway just outside my bedroom door, trying to figure out what was going on. My friend suggested that maybe my neighbor had sleep apnea, and the breathing sound was coming from him. The wall we'd been listening to was shared with a neighboring apartment, and it was likely his bedroom on the other side. Still, she couldn't completely rule out the possibility of something paranormal. She also floated the idea that I might somehow be creating these experiences unconsciously. As we talked, the buzzing sound grew louder, as if trying to draw us back into the room. My friend had brought sage with her, just in case. She suggested smudging the apartment, and I agreed. After we did that, the strange occurrences stopped completely. I lived there for a couple more years, had my son while living there, and moved out when he was 9 months old. Nothing unusual happened again after the smudging. To this day, I'm not sure what was going on. Maybe the sage really did clear something out. Maybe my friend was right, and I had somehow been creating it without realizing. Another theory I've considered is that my upstairs neighbor had something to do with it. He was an older man I never felt comfortable around. Shortly after I moved in, I saw him being taken away in an ambulance. He came back from the hospital not long after we smudged the apartment, and that's around the time the strange noises stopped. I sometimes wonder if he had been in a coma and just wanted to return home. He might have heard me play that song with my ex-boyfriend before and been able to imitate the tune. But then again, the cell phone noises had started before he went to the hospital, so I really don't know. About 3.5 years ago, when I was 15, my mom and I moved into a townhouse in a small, wealthy suburban neighborhood in the middle of nowhere. The house had 2 previous owners, a family with a husband, wife, and baby boy, and before them, a single man. Nobody seemed to know much about the man. Shortly after moving in, we decided to have the basement finished so I could use it as my bedroom. The contractor we hired took months to complete the job. He refused to work alone and always had excuses for not coming. When it was finally done, almost a year after we moved in, I settled into my new room. And that's when the strange things started happening. At first, it was small things. I'd hear creaking, tapping, or papers falling off my desk. I had a large fan running all the time, so I blamed most of it on that. But when I turned 16, things got much more unsettling. One weekend afternoon, I was lying in bed waiting for my boyfriend, now ex, to come over. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs and decided to pretend I was asleep. I felt the mattress dip, as if someone had climbed into bed with me, and the bed creaked loudly. I could feel someone snuggling up to me, even breathing on my neck. After a moment, I decided to roll over, and no one was there. My heart sank and a sudden coldness swept over me. Terrified, I ran upstairs and avoided my room for days. A couple of months later, I was woken up in the middle of the night by a loud noise. I was home alone and too scared to move, so I just lay in bed, trying to go back to sleep. Then I felt someone standing beside me. I could hear and feel breathing right next to my face. When I finally opened my eyes, there was no one there. Little things continued to happen, though I tried not to think about them. I kept my dog in the room with me so I could blame any noises on her. But about a year later, I had a terrifying dream. In the dream, I was lying in bed with my boyfriend, now fiancé, and we were laughing and talking. Then we heard my mom coming downstairs, and I told him to hide in the closet. As I pretended to sleep, I suddenly felt something grab my wrists and pin me down. I tried to scream and struggle, but I couldn't move or make a sound. I woke up, but the feeling of being pinned remained for a few moments. The next morning, I noticed bruises on my left wrist that looked like finger marks. My boyfriend suggested I might have done it to myself in my sleep, but I didn't think that was possible. A couple of months later, when my mom went on vacation, my boyfriend stayed over. I hate sharing a bed, so he slept in the guest room upstairs while I stayed in the basement. I had just fallen asleep when I heard footsteps in my room and saw a light shining on me. I bolted upright to find my boyfriend standing there. He said he'd heard loud banging coming from the basement and thought I was being attacked. I hadn't heard anything, but his fear scared me too. We grabbed a knife and sat in the living room, where we could hear banging all around the house. Eventually, we locked ourselves in an upstairs bedroom and stayed there all night. Not long after that, I was in my walk-in closet trying on clothes. There's a door in the closet that leads to a small room housing the sump pump. We never go in there. For some reason, I decided to try opening the door, but the handle wouldn't budge, as if it were locked from the inside. Just as I was leaving the closet, I felt something push the door from the other side. Terrified, I left the house immediately. When I told my mom later, we checked the door together, and it opened easily. There was nothing inside except boxes and empty liquor bottles. My mom dismissed it, but I could tell she was just as scared as I was. In March 2011, I found out I was pregnant, and the activity in the house escalated. I'd hear footsteps upstairs, doors closing on their own, and large objects falling over for no reason. One night, I saw a shadowy figure near the back door. I thought it was my mom, but she was sitting next to me on the couch. The figure vanished when I turned on the lights. The next morning, my mom admitted that she'd been scared. She said that for 2 nights in a row, She'd felt someone climb into her bed and put a hand on the back of her neck. At first, she thought she was dreaming, but after what I saw, she wasn't so sure. Then one night, our dog barked hysterically at the glass sliding door. We saw a shadow move across the fence, and our neighbor's motion light turned on. Through the fence, we saw something tall moving incredibly fast toward the field behind our house. It wasn't an animal. By the time we checked from upstairs, it was gone. After my son was born in October, the activity started again. His baby swing moved on its own, and I heard noises on the baby monitor that sounded like someone in his room. One night, I saw flickering movement under my bedroom door and felt paralyzed, unable to move until it stopped. The most terrifying incident happened when my son was lying on the couch. He suddenly went stiff. His arms and legs stretched out, and his whole body shook as if someone were trying to pick him up and shake him. He started screaming, inconsolable for minutes. It happened again the next day. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. To set the scene, I live in a rural part of Darwin, Northern Territory. My parents recently purchased a large block of land surrounded by bushland. During the wet season here, which runs from October to April, the heat and humidity can be unbearable. One particularly sweltering day, I decided to cool off with my close friend Brad. We were splashing around in the pool and playing volleyball in my backyard. While we were laughing and tossing the ball, something caught my eye near the edge of the garden, where the yard gives way to thick bushland. There, standing partially hidden behind a palm tree, was a tall man. He had to be at least 6'8". He wore a dark trench coat and a hat that reminded me of something from the Blues Brothers. He looked almost identical to a picture I once saw online. Curious, and admittedly a little unnerved, I climbed out of the pool to get a closer look. The moment I stepped onto the grass, he slipped behind the tree. I ran over, determined to find him, but when I got there, he was gone. Brad thought I was imagining things, brushing it off with a laugh. Some friend, huh? But that wasn't the end of it. Over the following weeks, I saw him again and again. He became a haunting presence in my everyday life. One time, I opened the bathroom window to let out the steam after a shower, and there he was, standing silently in the yard. Our cat Diego, who usually loved exploring the garden, refused to leave the safety of the grass. Even our pet budgies died suddenly. On the same night, no less. The vet said they died of the cold, which makes no sense given it was the height of summer, and our air conditioners were running full blast to combat the heat. Things got even stranger one stormy night. I was in the shed, working on my motocross bike, getting ready for an upcoming race. The wind was wild, lightning flashed across the sky, and thunder rumbled so loudly it rattled the walls. I opened both shed doors to let the air flow through, trying to cool down the suffocating heat. Then, out of nowhere, there was a deafening bang. Startled, I spun around, thinking lightning had struck our smaller garden shed. Just as I was staring toward it, another lightning flash lit up the sky, and I saw him. Standing right next to the shed, clear as day, was the same tall figure in the trench coat and hat. It felt like something straight out of a horror movie. I didn't stick around to see what would happen next. Without thinking, I bolted for the house and ran straight to my mom. I know I'm 18, but sometimes you just need your mom to make things feel okay. About a week later, I went to the movies with my friend Maddie. We watched a horror film featuring a demon, and honestly, the creature looked eerily similar to something I'd seen in my nightmares. When we got home, the movie was still fresh in my mind, making the Hat Man's appearances feel even more unsettling. What scared me most was that he seemed to be getting closer every time I saw him. Whether I was driving home from work, training for motocross, or just relaxing, I'd catch glimpses of him. During one race, I spotted him sitting in the stands. I looked back to confirm what I'd seen, and ended up crashing my bike. which landed me in the hospital overnight. After the accident, things only got worse. One night, as I lay in bed, I jolted awake and glanced toward my window. There he was, just outside, and this time he wasn't alone. The demon from the movie was with him, and the Hat Man was patting it on the head like a pet. I screamed, waking up my younger brother. He's just a year younger than me, but already stands at 6'3", so he's a bit of a giant. Without hesitation, he grabbed a flashlight and stormed outside. I could see him out there, yelling into the darkness, telling whatever it was to leave me alone. That was a year ago, and I hadn't seen the Hat Man since, until last night. We've since moved to another rural area and built a new house. I thought I'd left him behind, but as I was driving home from my boyfriend's place around 9 p.m., he appeared again. He ran across the road, his figure illuminated by my headlights. I instinctively hit the brakes, and when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw him standing dead center in the road, perfectly visible in the glow of my taillights. Panic surged through me. I floored the gas pedal, speeding all the way home. It's honestly a miracle I didn't lose my license. When I was 6 years old, my parents went away for their anniversary, and my little brother, Josh, and I stayed at our Nana's house. Nana had been living alone since my grandfather passed away a few years earlier, so she enjoyed having us there for company. Josh and I were some of Nana's youngest grandchildren. The oldest was in their 30s at the time, and the youngest was just a baby. Growing up, we heard plenty of spooky stories from our older cousins about one specific thing at Nana's house, a painting. It wasn't horrifying to look at, but it wasn't exactly nice either. It was a portrait of an old Aboriginal elder, painted from the shoulders up. Everyone called him Big Nose Man, for obvious reasons. My cousin swore his eyes followed you wherever you moved in the room. Back when Nana and Papa lived in their old house, this painting hung in Papa's study. Nana used to tell us that their dog, Blue, refused to go near that room. When Nana moved to a new house, she kept the painting and hung it in her sewing room. That's where it stayed, right across from the guest room where Josh and I were sleeping during our visit. On the third night at Nana's, we took Blue out for a walk. As we were heading down the driveway, I suddenly remembered I'd forgotten a hat. Nana told me to run back and grab one from her sewing room. She said it would be quicker than me wasting time hunting for my own. So, without thinking much about it, I ran back inside and straight into the sewing room. It didn't hit me until I was standing there. The Big Nose Man painting was right behind me. The moment I thought about it, the door slammed shut. I froze, my heart racing. I turned toward the door and saw a shadow under the crack. Someone was standing on the other side. I thought it must have been Josh or Nana playing a trick. Feeling a little calmer, I turned toward the window, which faced the driveway. That's when my stomach dropped. I saw Nana, Josh, and Blue still waiting for me by the gate. A chill swept through the room. The temperature seemed to plummet in an instant, and then the painting started shaking violently on the wall. Before I could even process what was happening, it fell off and crashed onto the floor. I screamed louder than I ever thought possible, crying and calling for my mom and dad. Within moments, Nana burst into the room. She pulled the door open, scooped me up, and held me tight. I was shaking and sobbing uncontrollably. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my entire life. After that night, Nana decided she'd had enough of the painting. She burned it, saying it was better to be rid of it. She told me not to worry, that the strange smell and odd-colored flames were probably just from the paint. Still to this day, I can't forget the way that room felt, or the way that painting shook on the wall. My name is Kat. I'm 26, and I've always enjoyed reading about other people's strange experiences. It's comforting to know that we're not entirely alone in this world, and that something else might be out there. Anyway, here's my story. Apologies if it's a little long. The events I'm about to share happened back in January 2003, during the summer. I was a teenager at the time, and my family decided to take a vacation to Warrnambool, Victoria. I was extra excited because my parents allowed me to bring my best friend, Joe, along for the trip. We stayed in a townhouse my parents had booked. I don't remember the name of the place, but I do remember the owners mentioning that it had been recently renovated. It had a new kitchen, updated bathrooms, and other improvements. The house itself was originally built in the 1800s, so it seemed nice to be staying in a place that felt both fresh and historic. At least, that's what I thought at first. The layout of the townhouse was pretty simple. Downstairs, there were 2 bedrooms, one for my parents and another for my little brother, a bathroom, laundry room, kitchen, and living area. Upstairs had 2 more bedrooms. One of these rooms had 2 single beds, and the other had an ensuite bathroom. Joe and I quickly claimed the room with the ensuite, excited to have our own space where we could talk and laugh as much as we wanted without disturbing anyone else. The first night passed without incident, but on the second night, things got strange. Joe and I were chatting and joking around when the touch lamp on the bedside table suddenly turned on by itself. If you've ever used a touch lamp, you'll know it takes a deliberate touch to activate, and neither of us was anywhere near it. We hadn't even used the lamp since arriving. Of course, we freaked out a little, but I reached over and turned it off, which also took some effort. We laughed nervously, joking about how it must be a ghost, and tried to carry on as normal. Then it happened again. The lamp turned on by itself. This time, I made Joe turn it off, and we decided to call it a night, too scared to keep joking about it. The next night, I was lying in bed, drifting off to sleep, when I heard what sounded like someone opening and closing the drawers in the ensuite bathroom. I froze, too scared to get up and check. I convinced myself it must have been my mom putting something in the bathroom, since there was an outside door leading to it. The next morning, I asked her about it, but she told me she hadn't been in there at all. In fact, everyone had been asleep well before Joe and I had gone to bed. By the 4th and final night, things took an even stranger turn. My friend Tim called me late that evening. Not wanting to disturb Joe, I decided to take the call in the room next to ours, which had the 2 single beds. I told Joe I might fall asleep there and that I'd see her in the morning. After chatting with Tim for what felt like hours, I finally lay down and began to doze off. That's when I heard it, a soft, clear voice of a woman saying, "Good night, Catherine. Good night." I wasn't dreaming. I was still awake enough to know what I'd heard. I looked around the room, but everything seemed normal. Too tired to think much about it, I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, as we were leaving, I asked Joe if she had come into the room to wish me good night. She was completely confused and told me she'd fallen asleep right after I left. I asked my parents and my brother too, but they all said the same thing. They hadn't come upstairs that night. Joe and I started talking about all the strange things that had happened, the touch lamp, the noise in the ensuite, and now the voice I'd heard. That's when my dad turned to my mom and said, "Should we tell them?" Naturally, I asked, "Tell us what?" That's when they shared their own experiences from the trip. One night, while trying to watch a movie, the VHS player kept ejecting the tape over and over. My dad, who's great with fixing things, checked for issues but couldn't find anything wrong. Another night, while reading in bed, his bedside light turned off by itself. Frustrated, he said out loud, "Can you please just let me read?" To his surprise, the light turned back on. Before we left, my dad mentioned the strange occurrences to the property owners. They admitted that we weren't the first guests to experience such things. They also said the house had been fully rewired during renovations, so electrical faults weren't a likely explanation. To this day, I still wonder who, or what, said goodnight to me that evening. If anyone has insights or similar experiences, I'd love to hear them. Maybe the spirits are simply attached to the house, a place that once belonged to them. Whatever the case, I'll never forget what happened during those nights. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. A few years ago, I had a dream that felt much more vivid and realistic than most. Even in the dream, I was aware I was dreaming, which made the whole experience even stranger. In the dream, I was in the house where I currently live, standing in my mother's ensuite bathroom. With me was an elegant elderly woman. She wasn't anyone I recognized, but I didn't feel wary of her presence. If anything, she felt calm and welcoming. She had a graceful and refined appearance, like someone you might imagine belonging to an old English estate. She wasn't the short, white-haired, wrinkled grandmotherly type we often picture. Her hair was dove gray and slightly long, and she wore a flowing blue dress. Her voice was soft, and her long, slender fingers moved gracefully as she spoke. She asked me if I'd like to hear her play the piano. I eagerly agreed, and she led me to sit on the floor beside her. Her music was incredible. The melodies she played seemed to fill the room with joy, and her smile showed how much happiness playing the piano brought her. She told me she was thrilled to be able to play her favorite songs again. That's all I can recall from the dream. It didn't have a typical ending. There was no fading out or anything like that. I simply woke up the next morning. The memory of the dream stayed with me, though, especially the image of the elegant lady and her beautiful music. When I went downstairs, I noticed my mother talking quietly with my grandmother. They seemed deep in conversation, so I just nodded and walked past them. However, I couldn't help but notice my grandmother's sad expression. Later, after my grandmother had left and my mom came upstairs, I asked her what had been wrong. She explained that my grandmother was upset because her close friend, someone she had known for many years, had passed away after a long illness. Strangely, I wasn't surprised. I felt like I already knew. Even though I'd never met this friend, I was certain I had seen her before. I described the woman from my dream, the way she looked, her elegant manner, and even her piano playing. My mom stared at me in shock. She said everything I described perfectly matched my grandmother's friend, even though I couldn't possibly have known about her. Despite my mom's reaction, I didn't feel amazed or scared. It felt oddly normal, as though I had known this woman all along. My mom suggested that perhaps the woman had visited me in my dream as a way to say goodbye. It seemed as good an explanation as any, so I accepted it. A few weeks later, I spoke with my grandmother again. As we talked about her friend, I asked if she had a favorite song. My grandmother lit up and hurried off to find an old tape case. She hummed a tune, and as she did, I recognized it instantly. It was the same song the woman had played for me in my dream. My grandmother then told me that her friend had been an excellent pianist. Sadly, in her final years, her illness had prevented her from playing, something that had deeply saddened her. As we talked, a curious thing happened. A large leaf that had been tacked to my grandmother's wall suddenly fell to the floor. My younger brother used to collect unusual leaves from the park, maple, gum tree, jacaranda, and more, and my grandmother would proudly display them on her wall. The leaf that fell, of all the ones she had, was a laurel leaf. It was only then that I learned the name of my grandmother's friend. Her name was Laurel. It was late June, and we had just returned from Alice Springs after a racing event. Our next destination was Broome, but for the night, we stopped at a roadside free camp near Halls Creek. We set up a fire, ready to cook dinner and relax with a beer. While we were packing up, a young American guy walked over to our camp. He explained that he and his friends couldn't get their fire started because the wood was too wet from recent rains, and asked how we managed to get ours going. Dom, my travel companion, laughed and said it was bush magic before handing him a jerry can of petrol. The guide looked a bit confused, probably a city kid, I guessed. Seeing his expression, Dom invited him and his friends to use our fire and join us for a drink. He smiled and said he'd grab his mates. As Dom and I cleaned the BBQ plate, the group of Americans arrived. There were 5 of them, 2 women and 3 men. Dom and I had already eaten, so we sat and chatted while they used the fire to cook their food. One of the men stood out to me. He was quieter than the rest, never really joining the conversation. Instead, he walked over and quietly sat down next to me. He glanced my way with a polite smile. I asked, "You're not eating?" He shook his head and replied, "I don't eat much." Trying to keep the conversation going, I asked, "Where are you headed?" He simply said, "Here." That was the end of it. He wasn't rude, just content to sit by the fire, staring into the flames. The others were chatting and laughing while he and I sat quietly. I noticed how mesmerized he seemed by the fire. Eventually, I must have dozed off in my chair. The next thing I knew, Dom was carrying me to my sleeping bag. Half asleep, I asked him what time it was. "Just after midnight," he replied as he set me down. I drifted back to sleep as soon as I lay down. The next morning, I woke up to the sun shining and a cool breeze brushing my face. Still groggy, I crawled out of my swag and made my way to the fire. Dom was standing there with the Americans, but I immediately noticed something odd. The quiet young man from last night wasn't there. I asked where their friend was. Everyone, including Dom, gave me puzzled looks. "What friend?" they asked in unison. Now it was my turn to look confused. "The young quiet guy who sat next to me by the fire last night," I said, pointing to the spot where he'd been sitting. But when I turned to look, there was only my chair. "What?" I trailed off, trying to make sense of it. Dom walked over, put his hand on my shoulder, and asked if I was okay. It felt like they were playing some kind of joke on me. Dom sat me down, poured me some orange juice, and told me to take it easy. I overheard him tell the Americans, "She must have a headache." I was furious. How could they all act like nothing had happened? I was sure I hadn't imagined it. I looked at the ground where I thought the young man's chair had been, but there were no marks, no footprints, nothing. My heart sank. Could I have imagined the whole thing? A few years back, I was living in a small, creaky cabin in the woods with my partner. It was a quiet, eerie place surrounded by dense trees, far from town. At the time, I was in my early 20s and going through a period where my thoughts felt messy and aimless. I didn't know what direction I was heading in, and I found myself slipping into negativity. I'll admit, I wasn't the best person to be around during that time. I was moody, argumentative, and even entertained darker thoughts just to pass the time. Looking back, I never did anything outwardly disrespectful or dangerous in a paranormal sense, but I do wonder if my negativity somehow invited something darker into my life. Maybe, without realizing it, my bad energy was a door left open. On the night this happened, I had been in one of my worst moods, pushing my partner's patience to the limit. Eventually, he had enough, turned off the lights, and went to bed. It was late, almost early morning, and I stayed awake, stewing in my own thoughts. I felt angry, strange, and disconnected as I lay there in the dark. What happened next is hard to explain. I remember my partner rolling over and turning me to face away from him. I was definitely awake. I know I wasn't dreaming. Then he wrapped his arms around me and held me tightly. It wasn't a comforting hold. It was crushing, almost desperate. It felt like he held me that way for hours, and I couldn't move or turn back toward him. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, we didn't talk about it. I was embarrassed about my behavior the night before, and he didn't bring it up. We let it go as just another strange night. Months later, I took my partner to a small gathering with some close friends. We were all interested in paranormal topics, and as the night went on, we started sharing spooky stories. My partner, who was usually open-minded but not particularly into the paranormal, went quiet. When someone asked if he had any personal experiences to share, he hesitated before saying yes. His expression was serious, and it made me look at him in surprise. I didn't know if he had any stories like that, and he had never mentioned anything to me before. After some coaxing, he shared his story. He didn't look at me as he spoke, instead directing his words to the group. In his quiet, straightforward way, he said, "I've seen her face change. It turned into a snout with sharp teeth." I was stunned. At first, I thought it was a joke, but his tone and expression were anything but playful. He wasn't the type to make up stories or exaggerate. I knew this about him, which made it all the more unsettling. My friends encouraged him to explain further, and I couldn't help but listen intently. He described waking up that night to strange growling noises. He thought I was playing a prank, but when he reached over to me, I didn't respond. When he looked closer, he saw something horrifying. According to him, I was crouched on top of the bed, pressed against the wall, facing him but looking down. When I finally looked up, he said, my face began to change. It stretched and warped into something unnatural. A snout with sharp, pointed teeth grinning back at him. Terrified, he grabbed me and turned me away, holding me tightly to keep me still. He was too scared to let me move. That's when I remembered waking up, crushed in his arms. Hearing his account sent chills through me. I laughed nervously and joked that he was a terrible storyteller, but I could tell he wasn't lying. The way he spoke and the look on his face told me he wished he hadn't brought it up at all. I didn't know what to think. Part of me felt like I already knew, as if some part of the story had been buried in my memory. I've wondered about that night ever since. Could he have been dreaming? Maybe. But my own memories of the night, my mood, the strange energy in the room, the way he held me, make me question that. I don't believe I was possessed or influenced by anything dark, but I can't explain what happened. Sometimes, I wonder if it's possible for a negative image or thought to project itself onto someone else, creating an illusion rather than something real. I've been wondering lately, could I be haunted? Strange things have happened throughout my life, and while I've usually brushed them off as odd or random, they've started to pile up. I'm 18 years old, born in 1994, and I've lived in the same house in Melbourne, Australia, my whole life. My mom moved in 10 years before I was born. I hope this background helps set the scene. When I was about 10 years old, something really strange happened. One night, I couldn't sleep. That wasn't unusual for me. I've always had trouble sleeping, but this time felt different. It was like I was waiting for someone or something. I eventually started to drift off, but just as I laid down, I felt a cold breeze touch my lips. It was quick, like a cold kiss, and then it was gone. After that, I fell asleep and slept through the night. The experience left me shaken. It felt like someone was saying goodbye. I was so worried that I told my mom, and I even convinced her to call my grandmother the next day to make sure she was okay. Thankfully, she was fine. Around the same age, I had another unusual experience. The night before an open water swimming race, I had a vivid dream. In the dream, I was winning the race, but when I got to the beach, there was a long run to the finish line, and I lost. The next day, the exact same thing happened. I started the race strong, but when I got to the beach, the finish line was way up the sand, and I lost the lead during the run. I told my mom about the dream before the race, and when it came true, she was shocked. My mom has had her own strange experiences too. Once during a trip to the U.S., we stopped at a diner, and she said it felt incredibly familiar, like she'd been there before, even though she hadn't. Last year, after a tutoring session, something very odd happened. As I got into my mom's car, I noticed a small toy combi van near the joystick. I collect combis and have a ton of models and memorabilia, so I asked my mom where it came from. She looked at me and said, "I thought it was yours." I had never seen this combi before. It was rubber, my favorite color, blue, and looked worn, like someone had held it for a long time. Neither my mom nor my stepdad had any idea where it came from. Another time, before my mid-year exams, something even stranger happened. I'd skinned my knuckles during life-saving practice and needed Band-Aids. My mom bought a box, but they weren't the fabric ones I preferred. I put the box of plastic Band-Aids in my bag before bed. The next morning, I grabbed a box of Band-Aids from the kitchen table without thinking much of it and put it in my bag. When I opened the box on the way to school, it was sealed, and it wasn't the plastic ones. It was the favorite Band-Aids I'd wanted. When I checked my bag, the box of plastic Band-Aids was still there. My mom joked that someone must be looking out for me, but it felt more than just a coincidence. Another unsettling experience happened at my dad's rural property. It's very isolated, with the nearest neighbors a 3 to 5 minute walk away. I was there alone for a night, still uneasy after a recent break-in by my dad's ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend. Around 4 a.m., I finally fell asleep, only to wake up to the sound of footsteps on the gravel driveway. It was slow, like the sound of a horse walking. I called the neighbor to ask if she could see a white horse in the yard, but she couldn't. Then I heard footsteps on the dirt outside the house, like someone walking near the front door. I called the police, thinking it might be the ex-girlfriend. The officers checked the property but found nothing. Later, I heard something being dragged outside, which sounded too heavy to be moved by the wind. The police returned and searched again, but once again, they found nothing. More recently, my rescue puppy has started barking for no reason. She's a sweet, protective dog who rarely barks. Lately, she'll give a single, low woof pause, then bark again a few times while standing in front of me defensively. It's unsettling because she's been trained not to bark unnecessarily. Oddly, my 7 cats never react to whatever she seems to hear or see. I've always had a special connection with animals. People often comment that their pets, even the shy or cautious ones, warm up to me instantly. I've always thought of this as a gift, but now I wonder if it's connected to the other strange things in my life. Twice in the past few years, I've woken up with bite marks. They look like mosquito bites but are spaced apart, almost like a bite from something larger. Once it was on my neck, and the other time it was on my leg. I'm not trying to suggest anything fantastical like vampires, but the bites were unusual and unexplained. It all started back in 2007, and now it's 2013. I was just 10 years old when these events began, and back then, I wasn't into ghosts or scary stories. I didn't even think about stuff like that. But everything changed one night. I was lying on the couch, just about to fall asleep, when I saw her for the first time. Across the room, near the table, a little girl, about 6 years old, walked out of nowhere. I froze in fear and screamed before turning away. My mom rushed out to see what was wrong, and I told her what I'd seen. But when I looked back, the girl was gone. That was my first encounter with her. I saw her a few more times after that, usually sitting at the end of my bed. Curious and scared, I decided to ask my mom what to do. My mom, who's very spiritual, told me to try asking the girl questions. She said I should trust the first answers that came to mind because that might be the girl's way of responding. Nervously, I stood at my bedroom door, not daring to go inside, and asked, "What's your name?" The answer came clearly, "Mary." Then I asked, "How old are you?" "6," she replied. When I asked why she was there, she didn't answer. To this day, I still don't know. At first, I thought it was interesting, but soon after, strange things started happening, and I regretted ever talking to her. Here's why. She began following me even to school. I could feel a hot breath on my back, and it always felt like she was there. Sometimes I felt sharp stabs in my back, like tiny pricks or jabs. I became terrified of my own room. I couldn't sleep there. Here are a few moments that still give me chills. 1. Mary seemed to have a way of luring me into my room only to make me leave. Even my mom felt it. The energy in the room was so heavy, it was like you were being pushed out. Nobody could stay in there for more than 5 minutes without wanting to run down the hall. 2. One night I woke up late for no reason and looked around. I noticed a bulge in the curtain, like someone was standing behind it. At first, I wasn't scared, just uneasy. But when I started to get up, the thing ran to the end of the curtain. I saw the curtain flick, and then nothing. It was gone. I know what I saw. There's no way I imagined something running behind a curtain for no reason. 3. A friend once came over to hear about my experiences. We sat in my room, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed, and I started feeling uneasy, like I needed to leave. My friend convinced me to stay a little longer. Then, out of nowhere, she yelped, "Howl." When I asked what was wrong, she said something bit her ear. I didn't believe her at first, but when she turned to show me, her ear was red. She swore it felt like teeth, and her hands had been nowhere near her ear. 4. One day, I went into my room after my sister had finished watching a movie on her portable DVD player. I heard music playing and thought she'd left the DVD running, but as I reached for the player, the music stopped. When I checked the screen, the player wasn't even on, and there was no disc inside. 5. One night, my sister and I were in our bunk beds, trying to sleep. Suddenly, we heard tapping on the window, like nails lightly hitting the glass. Annoyed, I didn't want to look because I was afraid of the window. I called my mom to check, but the tapping stopped as soon as she walked in. She went back to bed, and it started again. This time, I begged her to come back. When she stayed longer, the tapping got louder and louder until, finally, there was a massive bang on the window. That was enough for her. She let us sleep in the lounge that night. Since then, I've moved in with my boyfriend. His family claims their house has a ghost, and I've experienced strange things there too, though I won't get into all of it now. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I feel the same eerie presence as before. It's like Mary has followed me. In April 2012, I gave birth to my son Leo. At the time, I was still living with my parents. For the first 2 or 3 months, Leo slept in my room, but after that, we moved him into his own room. That's when I started noticing some strange things. The first thing I noticed was how cold his room would get. Even if the rest of the house was warm, certain spots in his room would feel freezing. Sometimes, the whole room felt cold. Oddly enough, Leo himself was always warm, no matter how cold it seemed. I had a video baby monitor, and I would often check on Leo through it. Many times I'd see him laughing and following something with his eyes, as though he was watching something move around the room. He would gurgle happily, pause like he was listening, and then gurgle again, almost like he was responding to someone. I also heard footsteps in and around his room, but whenever I looked, there was no one there. At first, I was uneasy, but Leo always seemed happy. I decided that if it was a spirit, it probably wasn't dangerous. In November 2012, Leo and I moved into a new place with my fiancée. Things seemed normal at first, but after a few months, I started noticing something odd about the bathroom. Every time I was in there, I would get this overwhelming feeling of sadness or anger, and it seemed to come out of nowhere. It didn't happen every time, but it happened often enough that I started dreading my time in the bathroom. I also noticed that Leo suddenly hated baths. Before we moved, he absolutely loved them, but now he screams the moment he sees the bath and the water. It was such a sudden and drastic change, and nothing bad had ever happened to him during a bath to cause this fear. Then, a few weeks ago, something really strange happened. My fiancé and I were sitting on the balcony just outside the living room, having a cigarette, when we heard a loud crash inside the apartment. We rushed in and found a couple of Leo's toys going off, playing music and making sounds, even though no one had touched them. There was nothing around that could have bumped them, and we couldn't figure out what had caused the crash. We laughed nervously and tried to move on with our night. But later, as we were getting ready for bed, one of Leo's toys started playing music again. What made this even stranger was that this particular toy was broken. It hadn't worked in a long time. Yet, for some reason, it was playing like normal. The next day, it stopped working again. That's when I started to wonder if a spirit might be involved, maybe even a child. The way the toys were being played with made me think it could be a child's spirit. I also started to think about Leo's sudden fear of water. Could the spirit have died in an accident involving water? It seems like Leo might have picked up on their fear. But then I wondered if this was the same presence that had been in Leo's first room at my parents' house. Back then, he didn't have water fears, and I didn't feel the bad vibes I've felt in this bathroom. I work part-time, so I'm home alone more often than my fiancé, and I've noticed more strange things during the day. I hear unexplained noises and whispering, and the bad feelings around the bathroom are still there. Sometimes my belongings go missing, only to reappear later in places I'm sure I didn't leave them. Things also fall off shelves or surfaces randomly, even when there's no reason for them to move. While these experiences are unsettling, I don't feel like the spirit is trying to scare me. If anything, it feels more playful, like they're having fun playing tricks on me. At the same time, there's a sadness I can't shake, as if the spirit is lonely or troubled. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I've been fascinated by the paranormal since my early teens, reading and learning as much as I could. My mother, who studies everything related to the paranormal, shared her knowledge with me growing up. She's very spiritual, but her understanding is more from books and research than psychic experiences. My father, on the other hand, had an incredible gift. He could see full apparitions, which were later verified as real. Yet strangely, he denied his ability and avoided thinking about the paranormal altogether. I guess some people prefer not to confront these things. As for me, I'm a creative person with a vivid imagination. I've had some strange experiences that I try to explain away as dreams or tricks of my mind. While I'm not the type to claim psychic abilities, a few close friends have suggested I might have inherited a bit of my father's gift. I'm still not sure, but there are some things I can't fully dismiss or explain. One experience, in particular, stands out, and I'd like to share it with you. A few years ago, when I was about 20, I lived in a small flat in the woods outside of town with my partner. It was a cozy place, but it could feel eerie at times, especially on stormy nights when the wind howled and the trees cast long, strange shadows. Still, it was home, and I felt safe with my partner there. The flat had belonged to my partner's grandmother, who had passed away a few years before. She was deeply loved and missed by the family. My partner had moved in after her passing, and though she was gone, everyone still referred to it as her place. The family often joked that if she hadn't approved of me, I would have known. I never met her, but I felt a connection to her and sometimes thought she might still be around. Occasionally, when I was alone, I'd get the sense that someone was nearby, not in a scary way, but comforting, like a quiet presence. Over time, my relationship with my partner became strained. We started arguing more, and I didn't handle it well. I tend to overthink and let negative thoughts take over, which made things worse. One night, after a particularly heated argument, I stormed out of the bedroom in a dark mood. The flat was small, with no real walls between the kitchenette, lounge, and bedroom, just a half wall separating the lounge and bedroom. I went to the lounge, flipped on the light, and sat on the couch, brooding. My thoughts turned darker than usual, and I found myself spiraling into a mindset that wasn't like me at all. Then suddenly, a loud pop snapped me out of it. I looked up just in time to see the light bulb twist slightly in its socket and drop from the ceiling. It stayed lit as it fell, which shouldn't have been possible. Halfway down, the bulb shattered, plunging the room into darkness. Glass scattered across the floor. At that moment, I felt an overwhelming presence fill the room, a cold, heavy sense of dread, as though someone was warning me or scolding me. The feeling was so intense it left me shaking. I froze on the couch, too scared to move because of the glass. I felt surrounded, like something was right there watching me. I screamed for my partner, who called out from the bedroom, asking if I'd broken something. It all happened so fast, but I remembered every detail clearly. The light bulb shouldn't have stayed lit after it detached from the socket, yet it did. The way it shattered, combined with the cold and the overwhelming presence, felt deliberate, like a direct warning. I eventually calmed down and returned to bed, praying silently for protection and apologizing for my thoughts. I even promised myself I'd never let my mind go to such a dark place again. The experience stayed with me for a long time. Years later, it no longer scares me, but I still think about it. I've since moved away and lost touch with the family, but I can't help but wonder if my partner's grandmother, or something else, was watching over the flat. Maybe it was her way of telling me to take care of myself and the family, or perhaps it was just a reminder not to let my negative thoughts take over. I'm currently 17 and living in Perth, Western Australia. The events I'm about to share happened over several years, starting in 2009. They revolve around my close friend, Kate, who has been haunted for as long as she can remember. Back in 2009, Kate lived with her mother, stepfather, and baby sister in an old, slightly creepy house in the suburb next to mine. The place was surrounded by dying grass, with barely any other plants or greenery. At the time, Kay and I went to the same high school, so we were very close. One morning, while her parents were out, Kay was home alone with her 13-year-old cousin. Like typical teens, they were dancing around the living room to Lady Gaga, taking pictures and videos on Kay's LG web slider phone, which was all the rage back then. That night, Kay looked through the photos and saw something chilling. 3 of them showed the figure of a young girl. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned white nightgown, and in one picture, there was a strange mist. The girl was surprisingly clear. You could even see her toes. There was more. A video of Kay dancing to Poker Face showed something equally unsettling. On a small table that had been empty when the video was taken, there appeared to be a head bouncing around wildly. The footage was shaky, but the head was unmistakable. Kay also found a handprint on the glass door of the TV cabinet. It was too big to belong to her baby sister, but too small for anyone else in the house. The next day at school, Kay showed me the photos and sent them to my phone. I've kept them ever since, though the video was on my old phone, which my mom now uses. I'm not sure if it's still there. I've shown the photos to many skeptics, and while some think they're fake, I know Kay well, and I've had my own experiences with her ghost. Kay didn't own a computer at the time, so she couldn't have used Photoshop, and her phone didn't have any editing software. I firmly believe the photos are genuine, but I understand if others don't. After seeing those photos, I had no plans to ever stay at Kay's house. But a few months later, circumstances led to me spending the night there. The place was, in a word, creepy. The floorboards creaked, doors slammed, and footsteps echoed up and down the hallway, stopping at Kay's bedroom door. I've always been afraid of the dark, but Kay seemed completely unfazed, saying, "It's like this every night." That was both the first and the last time I stayed there. In late 2010, Kay had a fight with her mom and moved in with her grandparents in Dunsborough, a small town a few hours south of Perth. I visited her there in March 2011 for a week. Her grandparents' house had a long wooden veranda running along the front, and Kay's room had a large window facing it. One night, after we got back from a disco, Kay fell asleep while I stayed up watching Happy Feet. Around 2 a.m., I heard knocking outside. At first, I thought it was one of Kay's friends looking for her, so I shook her awake, but she waved me off and went back to sleep. The knocking grew louder and faster until it sounded like a small child sprinting up and down the veranda at an inhuman speed. Frozen with fear, I sat up, listening as the knocking spread to the walls, circling the entire house. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The only sound left was the movie playing. The whole thing lasted about 3 minutes, but it felt like forever. The next morning, I told Kay what had happened. She casually said, "Oh yeah, that happens every few nights. Don't think too much about it." I visited Kay again in September 2011 for her 16th birthday. After her party, we went to bed, exhausted. I woke up in the middle of the night with an overwhelming sense of fear. Something in my head screamed, "Don't look. Whatever you do, don't look around the room." Despite the warning, I glanced toward the corner and saw her. A girl was standing there, her body slightly angled away from me but facing Kay. The room was dark, but the streetlight outside outlined her features. Terror took over, and I buried my face in the pillow, somehow managing to fall back asleep. That was the last major incident I experienced, though there was one night when Kay stayed at my house, and I thought I saw a child run past my window. I hadn't been sleeping well, so I told myself it was just my imagination. Kay has since moved back to Perth and lives with her boyfriend. I haven't asked if she still experiences anything, but I plan to next time we catch up. One more detail worth mentioning. Kay's mom once told her that their family has a history of paranormal experiences. As a child, Kay would often talk to someone invisible. In 2009, after taking the photos, Kay brought home a handmade Ouija board, but her mom immediately got rid of it before it could be used. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It all started when my partner and I decided to join some friends for a holiday in Ballina, NSW. We stayed in a large rental house on Riverside Drive, which backs onto the Richmond River. The house was huge, with 6 bedrooms, 2 kitchens, and 2 bathrooms. It was plenty of space for our group, 4 adults, 2 babies, and us. The first 2 days were uneventful, and we were all settling in nicely. But on the second night, something strange happened. We were sitting on the downstairs veranda, directly beneath the upper floor. Suddenly, we heard the sound of someone running in circles upstairs. It was loud enough to get our attention. The guy who booked the house said, "What the hell?" and went inside to check. As soon as he opened the door, the running stopped. He shrugged it off, saying, "Must have been next door." At the time, I didn't think much of it. On the third day, things got even stranger. The men were outside fishing by the river while I was in the downstairs lounge with the 2 other women. The 3-week-old baby was sleeping upstairs in his parents' room, and the 5-month-old baby was sleeping in a bedroom downstairs. As we chatted, we heard the faint sound of a baby crying upstairs. The baby's mother went to check, but came back shortly after, saying he must have had a bad dream. He was asleep by the time I got up there. We continued talking when we heard crying again. This time, both moms got up to check. The 5-month-old was fast asleep, and the 3-week-old was brought downstairs, still sound asleep. We all laughed it off and went back to chatting, until we heard crying once more. This time, it was louder and still coming from upstairs. We gave each other a look, that unspoken, "What's going on?" expression, before someone joked that it must be a neighbor's baby. We all quickly agreed and tried to move on. On the 4th night, we had a few drinks but called it an early night, going to bed around 9 or 10. My partner and I were staying upstairs, where our bed was in an open plant area next to the dining and lounge space. There were 2 marks on the wall nearby that looked like streaks of water, as if the wall had been crying. I thought it was just a bad renovation issue and didn't pay it much mind. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. That night, I woke up to a strange sensation on my foot. Half asleep, I felt like my partner was tickling me. I wriggled my foot to shake him off, but the tickling continued. I found it odd because he'd never done that before. Still groggy, I shifted further back on the bed, trying to move away. That's when I felt a warm body next to me, my partner, sound asleep. If he was in bed, then who was tickling my foot? The realization jolted me awake. I forced myself to open my eyes, even though I was terrified. I looked toward my foot, expecting to see someone, but there was nothing there, just empty air. Yet I could still feel the tickling, gentle and persistent. It wasn't pins and needles. It felt exactly like fingers tickling me. Panicked, I pulled my foot up to my chest, and the sensation stopped instantly. I stayed frozen, scanning the room with my eyes, too scared to move. I kept trying to convince myself it wasn't real, but the feeling was so distinct. The best way I can describe it is like those lightning globes you touch with your fingers, the little zaps of electricity you feel. That's what the tickling felt like. The next morning, I told the guy who had booked the house about what happened. He wasn't surprised. He told me he's experienced strange things in the house during past stays. He mentioned flickering lights, an eerie feeling in the front hallway, and even his car lights turning on and off by themselves while the keys were out of the ignition. He said he avoids the hallway because it makes the hair on the back of his neck stand up. His stories felt believable, especially after my experience. Looking back, I think it was a ghost. It didn't hurt me, but it was definitely my first encounter with something paranormal, and it scared me. Even though the spirit didn't seem harmful, I'll never forget the feeling of being tickled by something I couldn't see. I want to start by being honest about who I am, so you can understand my perspective. I am a scientist and an atheist. I search for truth and logical explanations in everything. That said, I've always been sensitive to the feelings of people around me and the energy of certain places. Over the years, I've come to accept that there are things in this world we can't fully explain, While I don't follow any religion, I do believe there are mysteries beyond our understanding. I'm sharing this in the hope that others who feel the same way might connect with this story. When I was 5 years old, I lost my first tooth. Like most kids, I was thrilled at the idea of the tooth fairy visiting, so much so that I couldn't fall asleep. It was a hot summer night, but I refused to turn on my fan. I didn't want to risk the tooth fairy getting sucked into it. Looking back, I laugh at the thought. Sometime around midnight, I finally drifted off, only to wake up again a few hours later, probably around 3 a.m. The first thing I did was check the egg cup on my bedside table where I had placed my tooth. To my disappointment, the tooth was still there. I felt a bit sad and went to my 7-year-old brother's room. For some reason, he was awake too. Maybe he was just as excited about the tooth fairy as I was. I told him she hadn't come yet, and he followed me back to my room. We sat cross-legged on my bed, chatting and hoping to catch a glimpse of her. As we talked, something in the doorway caught my eye. I looked up and saw the most beautiful, bright, fluorescent green light I have ever seen. Even now, I've never seen a color so vivid. The light was small, round, and slightly larger than a golf ball. It seemed to have a center point, with its brightness fading slightly at the edges. It moved slowly, floating into the room from the top of the doorway and drifting lower as it traveled toward us. I grabbed my brother's arm and pointed. He turned to look and gasped. We both froze, staring at the light in awe. But then we remembered something our parents had told us many times. The tooth fairy wouldn't come if we saw her. I panicked and said, "Let's cover our eyes so we don't scare her." My brother agreed, and we both closed our eyes tightly, shielding our faces. When I finally opened my eyes again, the light was gone. It had disappeared. For years, my childhood self believed that the light was the tooth fairy. Now, I don't claim to know what it was, but I'm certain it wasn't a dream or a trick of my imagination. My brother saw it too, and the memory is as clear today as it was then. Strangely, he and I have never talked about it since. I don't know why. It's just something we've both carried quietly. What stands out to me is how I felt in that moment. I wasn't afraid or uneasy. Instead, I felt joy and excitement. Even now, when I find myself in a place that feels unsettling, I think back to that light and how lucky I was to see it, whatever it was. I've held on to this memory for over 2 decades, but recently it has been on my mind more often. I've experienced other things in my life that I can't explain through science or logic, and for some reason, those experiences have brought me back to this one. My name is Pete, and I live in South Australia. The first time I ever experienced something ghostly was when I was 14 years old. It happened in Ringwood, a suburb in Victoria about 700 kilometers from Adelaide. My eldest sister was living there at the time with her soon-to-be husband. They were staying in his parents' house, a big place with 4 bedrooms and a pool in the backyard. The two of them were busy getting ready for their engagement party, and I'd arrived a few days early to join them. On the day I arrived, everything felt completely normal. My brother-in-law picked me up, and we went to their place, where my sister was running around, organizing everything for the party. That evening, around 11:30 p.m., my sister and her fiancé were in the kitchen working on last-minute preparations while I sat nearby, starting to feel tired. I told them good night and headed to the room they had set up for me. The room was at the very end of the hallway. It was spacious with a large king-sized bed, and I felt comfortable enough. I went inside, shut the door, and made sure it was fully closed. After getting into my pajamas and brushing my teeth, I climbed onto the bed and started reading a comic book. About half an hour passed, and as I sat there reading, I noticed the door had opened slightly. I didn't think much of it and walked over to shut it again, making sure it was closed tightly this time. But as soon as I got back to the bed, the door opened again, this time much wider. I looked at my reflection in the dresser mirror, feeling puzzled, and thought, "That's strange." Once again, I got up, shut the door firmly, and stood there staring at it for a moment. But while I watched, the door slowly creaked open again. This time, I leaned against the door with all my weight, trying to keep it shut. It felt like something on the other side was pushing against it, trying to get in. I peeked around the door to see if anyone was there, but the hallway was empty. Still, I could hear breathing, soft but unmistakable, and the room suddenly felt ice cold. At this point, my mind was racing. I had no idea what was going on. Fear took over, and I started screaming. A moment later, I heard heavy footsteps pounding down the hallway. It was my brother-in-law, looking annoyed and demanding to know what was happening. I was so shaken that I couldn't speak. I just sat on the floor, trembling. My sister followed him, and after a while, I managed to tell them what had happened. She didn't say much but told me I could sleep in their room for the night. The next morning, I woke up still feeling uneasy about what had happened. With no one else home, my sister was out shopping, and her fiancé was at work. I decided to avoid going back inside for as long as possible. Instead, I wandered around the backyard in my pajamas. While pacing, I glanced through the double glass doors into the lounge room. That's when I saw it. Sitting in an armchair was a faint, white, human-shaped figure. It was translucent, almost like a mist, but the shape was clear. At first, I thought it must have been sunlight reflecting off the glass, so I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The figure was still there. I froze, watching as it slowly stood up, stretched like a person waking from a nap, and began gliding toward me. That was it. I panicked and ran around the backyard shed 3 times, trying to calm myself down. At that moment, my brother-in-law's mother came over from the neighbor's yard. She asked me what I was doing, and without thinking, I told her I was chasing cats. She just laughed and said, "They're too fast for you to catch," and went back inside. I didn't dare tell her what I had really seen. After the engagement party later that week, my sister and her husband finally shared something they hadn't mentioned before. His father had passed away in the house a few years earlier from stomach cancer. They said other people had also seen or felt his presence. Hearing this made everything I'd experienced click into place. The house was sold a few months later, and I've often wondered about the people who live there now. I still believe that house is haunted, and I feel a little sorry for whoever moved in. I want to start by being clear about who I am. I'm a scientist and an atheist, someone who seeks logical explanations for everything. However, I've also had experiences that I can't explain through science, and I feel it's important to share them. When I was younger, I lived in a house that seemed to have some unusual things happening. At first, it was just small things. I would hear the voice of a young girl in the bathroom, saying random things. I thought it was a toy or something outside, but the voice was too close. The last thing I remember it saying was "welcome" in a friendly tone. After that, I never heard it again, and I ruled out the possibility of it being a toy. Not long after, something even stranger happened. In the hallway bathroom, there appeared to be a face on the wall. You could only see it when the light was on behind it. The shadow from the light cover would move around, but the face stayed in place, untouched by the moving shadow. The face always looked sad, and to this day, it's still there. Another odd thing I noticed was a slight bulge on the wall where the face appeared. One morning, I woke up and heard our son playing in the lounge. The TV was on, and I could hear what sounded like an old English voice speaking, almost evil, like a deep, unsettling voice. One weekend, my mom stayed over, and she said she heard someone say hello to her, loud enough that she thought someone was at the door. Another night, she said her hairbrush was thrown out of her bag and onto the floor from the wardrobe. One afternoon, I took a nap. I had my back to the edge of the bed, and suddenly, I heard someone speaking close to my ear. I remember hearing the word "velos" just as I felt a sharp, stabbing sensation in my head. From previous experiences, I knew it was the touch of a spirit. It felt like something was pushing right through me. Then something even stranger happened. Our bedroom door fell off its hinges. It was an old door, and before we could fix it, it was left leaning against the doorframe. One day, when I was careful not to bump it, the door suddenly flew down and almost hit me. If I had pushed it, I would have noticed, but it fell in a way that didn't make sense. We'd often hear small noises coming from the kitchen, and we even recorded some strange sounds and breathing. One night, while in the kitchen, I felt something fluffy brush against my legs, like a dog or cat running by. Another time, my partner walked into the kitchen, and after she passed the bench, a toy was slammed off the bench and onto the floor with no bounce, just a loud, sudden thud. Another time, I was standing in the lounge talking to someone near the fireplace. I felt something rushing toward me from behind. I thought it was our son running by, but instead, I saw a gray, hazy mass fly past me at high speed. On another occasion, I saw the faint outline of a person walk from the kitchen door and through the bathroom wall. After that, I noticed random objects moving back and forth, as though they had been kicked. One night, I felt like something grabbed my foot and pulled it. The feeling stayed around my foot for a while, and it happened several times after that. A few different times, my partner woke up with 3-pronged scratches on her forehead or random scratches on her back and neck. This brings me to sleep paralysis. When I was younger, I lived in a town with a rich spiritual history. It was an ancient Aboriginal healing and burial ground. During that time, I had many out-of-body experiences, from unintended astral travel to waking up unable to move. I know that in a true out-of-body experience, OBE, your body is completely still and you can't move at all, but you're aware. On one occasion, I felt a breeze shoot up my nostrils, and I was able to move again. On other occasions, my spirit would leave my body, and I'd fly back into it, waking up with a rush, as though I had been flying. I also had ghostly encounters, where I was touched, attacked, or even partially possessed. Back to the present. I'm a bit of a night owl and often find myself awake in bed, hearing strange noises. One night, as I was trying to fall asleep, something rushed into the room so fast that it blew the curtains around. I suddenly felt pinned to the bed, unable to move. I could barely whisper, and my hand felt like it was frozen, but I couldn't move it. It lasted about 10 to 15 seconds, and then it stopped. A few nights later, it happened again, but this time, I managed to move my legs just enough to wake my partner. When I nudged her, the pressure lifted. After that, it happened again while I was wide awake. One night, I saw a red orb floating above me right before the attack. I was dreaming about the attack, and when I woke up, I saw the red orb again, leaving the room. It wasn't a dream anymore, as I was fully awake when it happened. Now I'll share a couple of stories from when I lived in that town. A friend of mine lived in an old house with a veranda. They started hearing strange noises on the veranda, and one night, a doll that laughed and cried on its own kept going even after the batteries were taken out. He had to smash the doll to make it stop. One time, my mom was babysitting, and I went to visit her. I decided to play a prank and made some noises while hiding behind a dryer on the veranda. When Mom opened the door to check, I hid again. But then, I felt a strong presence behind me. I turned around and saw 3 figures: a man in modern clothes, an old Aboriginal man with a loincloth holding a spear, and something smaller in the middle. I stared at them for a few moments before I calmly walked back toward the door, feeling a cold hand pass through my head as I went. I knocked on the door and begged the ghosts to accept me as a friend. Once inside, I told Mom about the encounter, but after I mentioned I wasn't scared of ghosts, something tickled my foot under the table. It was a definite touch, not an itch or twitch. Mom also mentioned that while sleeping in one of the kids' beds, she felt the pressure of someone sitting at the end of the bed. Back at our house, things kept happening. The TV channels would change on their own, and the VCR would start playing by itself. We had heard that the previous owner of the house had passed away there. One day, while I was in the kitchen, I started getting goosebumps, and my hair stood on end. I felt a presence enter my body. I couldn't move, but then suddenly, my right arm moved on its own, playing a melody on the teacups with a teaspoon. Afterward, I could move again. We also brought a cat into the house, and it freaked out, managing to climb into the back of an old TV. One night, while the cat was on my bed, I saw an arm shoot up under the blanket toward the cat. It was strange, and we decided to move soon after. I took the cat next door to my neighbor's house, where things were equally strange. A calendar on a hook started spinning, and long drapes were blowing in spirals. The cat was terrified, looking up at something none of us could see. I've had many encounters like this, and I'm still trying to understand them. Some of my friends report similar experiences in the town, and it seems like ghosts are always nearby. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I'm 19 years old and from Australia. I want to share some strange experiences I've had over the years. Ever since I can remember, I've been afraid of the dark. Growing up, I always felt like I wasn't alone, like someone else was around, even when I was by myself in the house. My parents told me that when I was very young, I would watch and talk to things they couldn't see. Now that I'm older, I'm more skeptical about ghosts. I try to look for logical explanations for strange things that happen, but there have been some experiences I just can't explain. One of the first experiences that stands out happened when I was about 8 years old. I was sitting outside with my dog, just relaxing and having cuddles, when I clearly heard someone say my name. It sounded like they were right next to me, but it was just me and my dog. Another similar event occurred when I was 11. I was in class during free time, so it was pretty noisy. While I was sitting and drawing, I suddenly noticed all the voices around me got really quiet and muffled, almost like I had my hands over my ears. Then I heard a clear voice say my name a couple of times, and everything went back to normal. I was a bit alarmed by this, but I didn't say anything about it at the time. When I was about 15 and living in a new house, something happened that I couldn't explain. I was unplugging something from the power point, and without thinking, I pulled the plug out without switching the power off. When I went to plug in a new appliance, right in front of me, the switch flicked itself off, stopping me from plugging it in. In this same house, my dog would often bark frantically at something at the end of our hallway. I checked to see if something was there, but I never found anything. My mom and sister both recall being woken up by something grabbing them on the arm, which was especially odd because this happened to my mom when she had accidentally fallen asleep with a lit cigarette in her hand. A couple of years later, I moved 21 hours away from my mom, and nothing unusual seemed to happen for a while. While I was away, my mom visited a clairvoyant. The moment she walked in, the clairvoyant told her that something was following her, looking for someone whose name started with an H. My name is Haley, and I thought it was strange that the clairvoyant knew that right away. Later that year, my mom came to visit me. About a week after she left, I was washing the dishes when I heard a loud bang on the counter next to me. I looked around but didn't see anything, so I went back to what I was doing. A few seconds later, I heard another bang. This time, I looked again and saw a cup on the counter rocking back and forth, as though it had been picked up and set down again. The spot where the cup was sitting has a bump, so if you put something down roughly, it will rock for a few seconds. I couldn't help but think maybe whatever presence was following my mom had traveled with her and had found me again. Most recently, just in the past few days, I've had a few more strange things happen. I heard my guitar play a single note on the G string, then mute itself quickly. I also saw a white orb float around my doorway, and I heard footsteps on the carpet so clearly that I actually looked up to say hello, thinking it was my boyfriend walking in. These experiences didn't happen to me, but to my mother, and they took place while she was working in the Kookaburra wing, also known as the old wing of a 5-story hospital. This building housed the morgue and had a tunnel that led to the old cremation building. These events occurred about 2 years after we had moved out of the house on the hospital grounds. Another male nurse lived there after us but moved out after only 2 months, saying the activity had become violent. The house was left empty for 10 months before it was torn down, along with 20 other houses, to make room for a new building with 4 wings. But what happened, there is a story for another time. The old wing was used as both a hospital and a morgue for tuberculosis, TB patients. The main spirit, believed to haunt the building, is that of a former nurse who died there from TB. The nurses didn't mind her presence, as she was known to help out rather than cause trouble, most of the time. I've seen her twice myself. Both times, she smiled at me and went on her way. Nurses, doctors, cleaning staff, and cooks often heard strange noises in the building. Things like walking, trolleys being pushed, and beds being moved, especially late at night when nothing should have been happening. They also heard the sounds of distressed patients on the top floor, even though that floor was used for offices, not patient rooms. My mother had two very strange experiences in the old wing. The first incident happened on a Saturday night, and it still leaves everyone who heard about it confused. My mom and another nurse were working the night shift when they checked on two dementia patients in one of the rooms. These patients were both unable to move on their own and needed to be pushed in wheelchairs. One of the patients also had a plastic sheet on her bed because she couldn't control her bowel movements. After checking on them, the nurse went back to the nurse's station. There were 4 beds in the room, but 2 of them were empty. Then the buzzer went off for one of the empty beds. This wasn't unusual, as the beds often went off on their own. My mom got up to check on it, only to find that the patients had swapped beds. This didn't make sense, as they couldn't move on their own. The woman with the plastic sheet had ended up in a bed without one, and my mom knew she couldn't have moved her on her own. My mom and the nurse moved the beds back to their original spots and decided to wait until the day shift came to help. But the story doesn't end there. About 30 minutes later, the buzzer went off again. My mom went to check, and the patients had swapped beds again. Feeling confused and a little unnerved, my mom left the patients where they were and spent the rest of the night in the nurses' quarters, convinced she was going crazy. The next event took place 5 months later, on a Wednesday shift. There was a patient who constantly complained about something and kept pressing her buzzer. Eventually, they took the buzzer away and decided to check on her every hour. One Wednesday evening, my mom went to check on her at around 10 p.m., and the patient was sleeping. So my mom went back to the nurse's station. At 4 a.m., the buzzer started going off, even though it wasn't connected to the patient's bed anymore. My mom thought someone had plugged it back in, so she went to see what the patient needed. As she got close to the room, she heard the patient screaming, saying, "Get me off this bloody thing, it's hurting my behind." My mom was confused. When she went into the room, the patient was complaining about being left on a bedpan for an hour. The patient couldn't get up to use the bathroom because she was overweight. When my mom asked her who had put her on the bedpan, the patient answered, "The nurse in the white dress with the red cross on her hat. Bring her in here so I can give her a piece of my mind." My mom was taken aback because no nurse at the hospital wore a white dress with a red cross on the hat. The nurses wore navy blue shirts with white spots and black pants. My mom believes the nurse the patient was referring to was the spirit of the nurse who died at the hospital. Even though the old wing is no longer used as a hospital, the building is still in use as offices, and the morgue is still operational. The strange sounds continue, as if the hospital is still in operation. I want to share a story about a house I once stayed in. It was an old bungalow from the late 1800s in a quiet country town in South Australia, just left of Kapunda, along a tree-lined street. The house had a return veranda, and its past residents were kind, hard-working people. I was very close to their daughter, Anne, and her family felt like my second family. We had known each other for over 30 years and shared many good and bad times. Before Anne's family moved in, 2 old women had lived there. They had divided the house in 2 and lived in near darkness, with heavy curtains at the windows. This was before World War II. Both women died there at an old age. The house was originally built by a neurosurgeon. He had an operating theater and a few hospital beds in the 3-room cellar. His consulting room, located above the cellar, was later turned into 2 bedrooms and a walk-in closet at the end of the hallway. Anne's father and brother eventually closed off the cellar, which could be accessed from the back veranda. Anne recalls being allowed to play on the stone steps leading to the cellar, but was never allowed to go inside. She remembers seeing iron beds, pots, pans, and piles of paperwork. The cellar was later filled with rubble, and the area was transformed into a laundry and kitchen. The house was restored to its original condition, and the division from the old maids was removed. Anne's parents loved gardening, and they planted roses, lawns, and fruit trees on the half-acre lot. When my husband and I stayed at the house, we always stayed in the room that had once been the consulting room. It had 2 doors, one from the main hall and the other leading into the back lobby. There was a large cedar wardrobe between the doors, and a small black fireplace in the corner that was no longer in use. The tall window opened onto a gravel courtyard with a trellis on the side fence. The room was bright and airy. Anne and I would often talk about the house and its history. We spent many summer days exploring vineyards and antique shops, sometimes staying up late in the kitchen, laughing and cracking crabs for supper. However, things changed when my life took a darker turn. I no longer had my husband of 15 years, but Anne and I still spent time together. One night, I went to bed early. It was around 10:30 p.m., and I wasn't drinking that night, just tired from a busy week. I snuggled into bed, feeling half asleep and half awake. The night was warm, and I lay on my back with the sheet halfway up my body, my arms resting on top. I hadn't opened the window because it was on the warm side of the house. As I lay there with my eyes closed, I thought I could smell the sweet fragrance of damask roses, but there were no roses in my room. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway, the sound of leather heels on wood, and the swish of skirts. The door opened fully, and 2 figures entered the room. They stood next to my bed. The man was dressed in a dark 3-piece suit with a gray beard. He looked at the woman, who was dressed like a nurse, and said, "She has done this before." I felt like I was dreaming, but I knew I wasn't. I couldn't wake up, and I thought I had died. I prayed they wouldn't do an autopsy. I felt like I was watching the scene from above, from the top of the wardrobe. The woman had dark hair and a clear complexion. She was in her early 30s, wearing a black dress with a long apron and cuffs up to her elbows. She held a tall glass lamp and said to the man, "What do I tell the master? He is home." The man said he would speak with him and left the room. The woman placed the lamp on the nightstand, leaned over me, and covered my face with the sheet. I could smell borax. I felt calm, almost too calm. She opened the window and left the room. I saw the curtains swaying gently from the warm breeze. I woke up in the early morning. The sheet was over my face, and the window was open. The door was wide open, though it had been slightly ajar when I went to bed. There was no lamp on the nightstand, and the faint scent of damask rose lingered in the room. I got up, put on my silk robe, and went to the kitchen for a drink of water. I felt numb from the experience, and I needed to clear my head and get back to normal. Anne was in the kitchen, restless as usual. She often walked the garden at night when she couldn't sleep. We talked about what happened, and she didn't doubt me. She told me she often heard adult voices from the fireplaces and vents, which led to the cellar. When she was alone, she would sometimes feel a presence in the house. The town had always had rumors about the place. After the conversation, we both ended up falling asleep in the lounge. The next day, we talked to Anne's parents about what happened. They weren't surprised. Anne's mother, who was a devout Christian, reassured me that nothing would harm me. She and her family opened their hearts and their home to me, and I wasn't afraid. But I still wonder. Anne has since moved far away, and her parents and brother all passed away in the same year. The house was sold, and I drove past it once. The house was painted black, with palms on the front veranda. The lawn and garden were dead. I'll never forget Anne and her family. They'll always have a special place in my heart. I believe people come into our lives for a reason. My life is brighter and happier now, but this experience remains part of the rich tapestry of life. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. This story took place about 4 years ago when I was at Vidya's house with 2 friends, Vidya and Shweta. At that time, Vidya was completely obsessed with Ouija boards and insisted on having a seance. I wasn't too keen on the idea since I had read that only spirits from the lower astral plane could be contacted with the board, and they often trick you. Shweta was scared and refused to participate, but Vidya convinced us to join her. We ended up on the terrace of her house around 8 p.m. The terrace was large with beautiful potted plants, and aside from an empty clothes line, it was all ours that evening. Let me describe the board we were using. It was homemade by Vidya. The board was a polished, rectangular wooden piece with letters, numbers, yes, and no in the corners, and hello and goodbye at the bottom. We used a shot glass as a pointer, with a silver coin on top to make sure none of us were pushing it. We started by saying a few prayers for protection. We arranged the candles in a circle around us and turned off the lights on the terrace, leaving only the light of the full moon and the candles to illuminate the space. For about half an hour, we tried asking if there were any spirits around, but nothing happened. The glass didn't move at all, and I was feeling a bit disappointed, even though I didn't want to be part of it. I sat back against the wall, trying to warm myself, as it was pretty cold that night, and I hadn't dressed warmly enough. We talked about movies and other things for a while, then decided to try one more time before heading home if nothing happened. We blew out the candles and relit them, then started again. For the first 15 minutes, there was still no response, and I was getting really annoyed with Vidya for wasting my time. I didn't show it though and kept going along with it. The clouds covered the moon, and only the candles gave light. I started to feel uneasy. That's when the glass suddenly moved, just a little jerk at first. It was enough to scare me, but I was also fascinated. Slowly, the glass moved toward yes. We asked the spirit a few questions, and it answered that it was a man who had died in a car accident. When we asked if it was from the sun or the moon, it answered moon, meaning it came from the lower astral plane, or what we thought of as hell. We quickly said goodbye and ended the session, feeling we had enough for the night. Shweta and I got up, ignoring Vidya, who seemed too involved in the board. Ad won't let Brad stay at my house. We hadn't noticed it at the time, but during the seance, the temperature had dropped. It might have been the wind, but I thought I should mention it. Shweta and I were talking about how weird the whole thing was when we heard Vidya call us. She had stayed behind and was now playing with the board alone. She claimed to have contacted a spirit again. We approached but didn't touch the planchette, thinking it was harmless. The next question Vidya asked was for the spirit to prove its presence. As soon as she asked, the glass shattered. Shards of it flew onto her arms, cutting them. She screamed and jumped back, knocking over 2 of the candles. The other 4 candles simply went out, even though there was no wind. We were all terrified and ran out of the terrace, helping Vidya bandage her arms. She apologized, saying she only wanted to test if Ouija boards were real. I told her I didn't think they were, and the events that night only confirmed my beliefs. Not wanting any lingering spirits on the terrace, we went back up with some courage and said a few more prayers. We used holy water to sprinkle around the corners and then left. That was the first and last time any of us used an Ouija board. I don't know about Shweta, since she moved to a different city, but Vidya and I have never used it again. The board is still in Vidya's house, buried under old toys and board games, and not surprisingly, neither of us is tempted to use it again. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.